What's your home address where she's missing from?
14155 South Beaver Creek Road, number 201. The same as Ashley Pond.
And what's your daughter's name?
Miranda Gaddis, Gaddis, and no one's talked to her or seen her.
I know Ashley ran away, and the fact that the FBI are throwing both of these cases, into someone took them both.
I need to tell everyone about my father, man. About what he did to those girls.
Okay. What do you think he did?
I know what he did, man. He did it. He kidnapped those girls. And then he killed them. This is where I have to stop against my family, man. Me and my brothers aren't like that. We got a good heart. If I have to, I will testify against my own father.
Crime, in many ways, is a manifestation of the duality of human nature. In some cases, it's impossible to unveil the face behind a mask digging through the layers of deceit and betrayal. It's difficult to come to terms with the fact that the criminal responsible for a crime is not the person who had been suspected, but rather someone whom nobody would have ever imagined. Today's case is no exception. It's a story about a 12-year-old girl, Ashley Pond, who went missing without a trace on January 9th, 2002 from Oregon City. And just when everyone thought things couldn't get any worse, her 13-year-old classmate Miranda Gaddis also disappeared 2 months later on March 8, 2002. The events that unfolded in this case are nothing short of unimaginable. Families were torn apart, communities left in fear, and investigators left scratching their heads as they tried to unravel the twisted web of lies that surrounded this case. Every step of the investigation revealed new twists and turns, taking the nation on a roller coaster ride of emotions, from hope to despair, from disbelief to horror. So, how did the mystery unfold? Hello and welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from around the world. Oregon City, Oregon is a hidden gem nestled in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. This charming city boasts a rich history and stunning natural beauty, making it a must-visit destination for travelers seeking an authentic Oregon experience. From the iconic Oregon City Municipal Elevator to the historic McLaughlin House, there's no shortage of cultural and historical landmarks to explore. Whether you're a history buff, nature lover, or simply seeking a peaceful getaway, Oregon City has something for everyone. But this place also witnessed the tragic end of two girls who met their untimely death in 2002. It all began on January 9th, 2002 in Oregon City, Oregon. On this winter morning, 12-year-old Ashley Pond was running late to meet the school bus. Ashley woke up that morning to her younger sister Brianna's voice and grabbed a quick breakfast. Just after 8 a.m., she put on Tommy Hilfiger jeans, a spaghetti-strap shirt and a sweatshirt, waved goodbye to her mother Lori Pond, and rushed out the door. After school, she also had a dance class to attend. Unfortunately, she would end up missing school and the dance class, both that day and forever.
I woke her up in the morning, and I just told her to get up.
The bus stand was only minutes from the Newell Creek Village apartments where Ashley lived, so her mother didn't mind her walking alone. Little did Lori know, on that fateful day, her daughter embarked on a journey that would lead her to her doom. Ashley did not get on the bus and never made it to Gardner Middle School. The girl disappeared without a trace. As the day passed, Lori waited patiently for her daughter to call to pick her up from her dance class. When the call never came in after hours, Lori began to panic. She frantically called her school and dance class and found out that she didn't make it to either of the places. Helplessly, Lori called all her friends, hoping that Ashley might have been with one of them. Unfortunately, she did not get a positive response from anywhere. Out of options, Lori dialed 911 to file a missing persons report for Ashley.
She's been missing since this morning. She would never run away, though. Okay, you don't think she'd ever run away? No, that's something a little bit different then.
Officers from the Oregon City Police Department were dispatched to Lori's Newell Creek Village apartment, and they started their investigation into this disappearance. Although a search was immediately conducted, police were not concerned. They were considering the theory that Ashley had probably run away and would head back home in a few days. The news of Ashley Pond's disappearance spread like wildfire in Oregon City, and soon it became the only topic that anyone could talk about. Rumors began floating around that Ashley had indeed run away from home. But regardless of these theories, there was not a single clue to where she could have been. When police searched Ashley's room, all her favorite possessions were there. It was very unlikely for a 12-year-old not to take her belongings with her while running away from home. It further reinforced the fear that something terrible had happened to her. Trying to do anything to find her, Ashley's family began to distribute missing persons flyers for her. Every moment felt like an eternity to them, where they were unable to focus on anything but finding their loved one. Meanwhile, investigators sprang into action, retracing the last steps of Ashley. Her confirmed final location was the apartment complex, and no one could say for sure if she ever reached the bus stop. After interviewing some kids in the school bus, the police came to the conclusion that the disappearance occurred sometime between her leaving the apartment building and reaching the bus stop. The bus stop was positioned up on a hill. Behind the apartment complex, there was a wooded area, which kids often used as a shortcut to the bus stop. Investigators were unsure whether Ashley had taken the same road on the day of her disappearance. Although there were no concrete leads, after a few days of tireless searching, authorities were now considering the disappearance a possible kidnapping and even foul play. Without any other leads to pursue, investigators decided to look at those closest to Ashley, and that meant digging into her life. March 1st, 1989 marked the day when Lori brought her eldest daughter, Ashley, into the world, while she was unmarried and only 16 years old. Shortly after, Lori got married to her high school sweetheart, David Pond. More children soon entered the household, and Ashley became the elder sister to two younger siblings. Ashley was very loving and protective towards her siblings, especially her sister Brianna, who was just 18 months younger than her. Ashley was described as a laid-back and frivolous child who loved entertaining people. Due to her very bubbly nature, she made a lot of friends in Gardner Middle School. She was also a part of her dance team in school and rarely missed a dance class. The first few years of Ashley's life were no different from girls at her age. Sadly, it all changed around the age of 9 or 10, when her parents had a messy divorce. Out of all of Lori's children, Ashley was affected the most by the whole ordeal. While trying to accomplish the goal of paying less child support, David Pond unearthed a secret that had been buried for too long. Ashley's world came crashing down when a paternity test determined David Pond, the only father Ashley had ever known up until that point, was not her real father. Instead, her biological father was a man named Wesley Rowitker Jr. Surely, the revelation was a lot for Ashley, but she tried to embrace the truth with zeal. She even began regular weekend visits to Wesley in order to spend time with her father, trying to compensate for all those years lost. Sadly, the visits did not last long. After a brief period of time, Ashley said she no longer wanted to meet her father, accusing him of something despicable. Towards the very end of the year 2000, Ashley confessed to her mother and sister that Wesley was taking advantage of her. She acknowledged that the last time it happened was Christmas Eve of 2000. On January 5, 2001, Wesley Rowitker was indicted on 40 counts of abusing his own daughter. Integrity should not be expected from a man who is capable of abusing his own child. So, along with his lawyer, Wesley painted Ashley as a troubled young girl who would lie about anything and everything. Ashley's recantation of statements against her father also invalidated her credibility. Eventually, Wesley pled no contest to a much lesser charge and received just 6 months of probation with a no-contact order in September of 2001. Coincidentally, all of these took place right before the disappearance. Ashley's mother, Lori, had her eyes on Wesley regarding Ashley's disappearance and informed authorities about her concerns. He had both motive and opportunity to commit an abduction. To check whether or not he really was involved in Ashley's vanishing, investigators paid him a visit in the Portland home he shared with his father. At first, Wesley seemed to be only giving the background information regarding his relationship with Ashley. But in a surprising turn, he actually admitted to the investigators that he had his own daughter. He also added that his drug addiction and wrong choices in life led him there, and he was glad that Ashley turned him in. He insisted that he was ashamed of his actions and one day wished to make it right with his little girl. His version of longing for forgiveness might have seemed phony, but his alibi was stronger. He told the investigators that on the morning of Ashley's disappearance, he had breakfast with his father in a local restaurant. Then both men worked on an old truck until the afternoon. His father confirmed it, and the stories seemed to check out. While investigators had to put Wesley Roetger on the back burner, their attention shifted to another one of Ashley's closest. It was time for Ashley's mother, Lori Pond, to take the heat. Investigators found out many disturbing details about Lori, who by no means was a flawless mother. She had previously been accused of neglecting her children on many occasions, and her alcohol addiction played a significant part in this. In fact, she had multiple run-ins with law enforcement. From January 25, 2001 to January 9, 2002, on 5 separate occasions, Lori was contacted by law enforcement regarding her parenting skills. Complaints stated that she frequently locked her children out of the house, got involved in domestic disputes putting her children in danger, and ended up drinking excessively. Police and Department of Human Resources (DHS) employees were regular visitors to her apartment. Lori's relationship with Ashley was also strained, with conflicts often culminating in massive spats. Shockingly, during the last summer before her death, Ashley told her friends and teachers that the father of one of her friends had abused her. The accusations were reported by her teachers to the Oregon DHS, but shockingly, Lori never intervened. A report determined that Ashley and her siblings were receiving minimally adequate care under their mother's wing. It was puzzling why, despite all this turmoil, the Child Protective Services took no action. When police questioned Lori, she was honest. She immediately admitted her conflicts with Ashley and their unstable relationship. However, she also insisted that underneath all the scuffles, they shared a loving mother-daughter bond. Besides, she stuck to the story she told the investigators on the first day, implying that there were no discrepancies in her statements. Although investigators did not come across any feasible motives, they still persisted with Lori to take a polygraph test. After she passed the polygraph, she was ruled out as a suspect. After police eliminated Ashley's family members and loved ones, they unfortunately did not have a lot of leads. The area around the Newell Creek apartment complex was not great, and sexual offenders who could have had access to the building were high in number. The Oregon police interviewed almost all of them to search for new clues, but no efforts were successful. When all the leads were exhausted, the Oregon City Police Department requested assistance from the FBI on January 22, 2002. With the FBI's aid, the search to find Ashley Pond intensified. Ashley's abrupt vanishing hit the whole community of Oregon City hard, but the people who were taking it the hardest were her friends in school. On the morning of January 23, 2002, Anna Song, a reporter from Caddo News, interviewed a couple of kids at the bus stand while they were waiting for their school bus. It was the same bus stand where Ashley had caught her bus every day until she went missing. One of the girls participating in the interview was 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis, one of Ashley's closest friends as well as her neighbor.
That happened to one of your friends or something, it's just really different and really sad.
In a heartfelt interview, Miranda shared that she had no clue what might have happened to her friend, but she considered the possibility of kidnapping. However, Miranda also said that Ashley had confided to Miranda's sister about her desire to run away from home. Although Miranda kept smiling throughout the video, her concerns for Ashley were still visible. Sadly, the next time the face of Miranda Gaddis would appear on the news, she too would have mysteriously vanished. Miranda's life was not that different from Ashley's. Not only were they similar ages, but also resembled each other. But their similarities didn't stop there. They stayed in the same apartment building, attended the same school, belonged to the same dance team, hung out with the same friends, and both had been abused by the father figures in their lives. Both of the girls were also raised by their single mothers who had troubles of their own. the lives of the two best friends were destined to follow each other one last time in a malicious twist of fate. Miranda Gaddis was born on November 18, 1988, in Oregon City to her father Jason Richard Gaddis and mother Michelle Duffy. Just like Ashley, Miranda too grew up with her siblings, which included her older sister Marisa, her younger sister Mariah, and younger brother Jason. But unlike Ashley, Miranda's parents were married at the time of her birth. Yet that didn't change the fact that Miranda took her father's hand on a regular basis. In February of 1995, when Miranda was just 6 years old, her father, Jason Gaddis, was convicted of kidnapping 2 girls. He was sentenced to a grand total of 6 months in prison and was ordered 54 years of post-release supervision. Naturally, this incident led to the end of the marriage for Jason Gaddis and Michelle Duffy. Soon, Michelle got involved in a relationship with a man by the name of Brett Edward McKenney. Unfortunately, her taste in men would prove to be horrible. He was later convicted of his crimes and was sent to prison. Following this, Miranda and her siblings were placed in foster homes where they spent a short time before eventually returning to their mother's care. Despite tough times, Miranda enjoyed her life and loved to spend time with her siblings. Her friends described her as spunky, outgoing, funny, but very caring and loving at the same time. She had a passion for dance and saw herself becoming a model one day. One of the most admirable things about Miranda was that she took it upon herself to warn others of the dangers she saw, trying to save them from the evil side of the world that she witnessed. Motivated by Miranda's initiative, the Gardner Middle School dance team had been preparing for a dance performance scheduled on March 23, 2002. The performance was supposed to be part of a scheduled event to raise money for a reward fund for Ashley Pond, whose disappearance had been a painful mystery for almost 2 months at that point. Like many others, Miranda too began to let down her guard. Nobody knew that evil was still lurking around the corner. March 8, 2002 started like a normal day in Oregon City. By then, the community had almost recovered from the blow of 12-year-old Ashley's disappearance and had returned to its normal routine. At Miranda's house, the day began like most school days. At 7:30 a.m., Miranda's mother, Michelle, left for work when Miranda was getting ready for school. Michelle assumed that her daughter would follow her daily routine and set off for school by herself. She was oblivious to the fact that she was seeing her for the last time. At around 1:20 p.m. that day, Michelle got a call from her oldest daughter informing her that Miranda was not at school and none of her friends had seen her. A nervous Michelle then called the school to investigate the matter, where she learned that Miranda had indeed missed all of her classes that day. After what happened to Ashley just weeks before, Michelle did not waste time in alerting the authorities to her daughter's disappearance.
What's your home address where she's missing from?
14155 South Beaver Creek Road, number 201. The same as Ashley Pond.
And what's your daughter's name?
Miranda Gaddis, Gaddis, and no one's talked to her or seen her.
Everybody, including the Oregon City Police, noticed the eerie similarities between Miranda's disappearance and Ashley's. While the first case was still out in the open, this was another horrific strike on the town. The community was reeling from the shock in its wake, and panic cloaked the minds of every parent in the town. They were all scared to send their children outside alone, fearing that the abductor was still out there preying on young girls. Law enforcement officials also believed that the two disappearances were connected, possibly committed by the same person. But they were racing against time to find out the next move from the unknown perpetrator. They were considering all the worst possibilities at this point, and foul play was the first on that list. While the chances of getting the girls back seemed slim, investigators dedicated their time and efforts to finding any evidence that could help them unravel the mystery.
We're looking for people who have those time frames in common, who may have Ashley and Miranda in common.
The town was swarmed by the local and state law enforcement officials and FBI agents with their trained canine units. They also put up major advertisements with the girls' faces on billboards to bring awareness to the case. The dance, which was supposed to be held for Ashley, became a fundraiser for both girls. The solo performance Miranda was preparing was performed by her older sister. Detectives were sweeping the area, stopping cars and interviewing locals. There was one particular house that caught their attention. Detectives from the Oregon City Police Department went to talk to the resident of the house, a 39-year-old man who went by the name Ward Weaver. Ward Weaver's house was at the top of the hill where Ashley and Miranda's bus stop had been. The home, positioned at the exact location of 2507 South Beaver Creek Road, was rented out for $600 a month. Ward Weaver moved into the rental house in August 1997. By 2002, he was living in that home with his 12-year-old daughter Mallory, his 19-year-old son Francis, and a girlfriend who he'd met at work and become romantically involved with. Mallory, who attended the same school as Ashley and Miranda, was friends with both of them. They hung out with the same group and spent a lot of time together, sometimes even after school. Mallory was very popular among her friends, especially because her home was a place where the children could hang out without any restrictions. Weaver had a huge backyard where all the kids played hide and seek and enjoyed junk food. Ward Weaver even allowed regular sleepovers at his house. Both Miranda and Ashley often spent time with Mallory, and Ashley frequently stayed there for sleepovers. However, Mallory was not the only one who was popular. Her father, Ward Weaver, also played a huge part in entertaining the children. He was basically the cool dad in town, whose house symbolized an open invitation for neighborhood kids. Since Ward Weaver's house was just off the street to the bus stand where both girls had been headed on the day of their disappearance, investigators decided to make a stop there. Weaver seemed friendly and cooperative enough to the investigators. He agreed that Miranda and Ashley both spent time in his house, but he denied seeing anything on the days of their disappearance. He also said that Ashley was a troubled teen who had all the reasons to run away from home. However, he did not have anything to say about Miranda. Although Weaver was not being considered as a suspect, investigators still requested if they could conduct a search at the home. Weaver voluntarily invited the officers to search his house and backyard, but they ended up finding nothing. Weaver also had an alibi, saying he was at work on both of those days and provided a time card to prove it. With nothing amiss at Weaver's house, detectives decided to pursue other leads. After interviewing several people in the Newell apartment complex, the FBI turned their attention to the two young men in their 20s named Adam and Scott. The men, who were roommates, lived in the same apartment complex. Investigators even learned that in the past, these two individuals were accused of making offensive comments about Ashley and Miranda. It was enough to believe that these two men might have had something to do with the kidnappings of both girls. To obtain more proof, a few undercover FBI agents attended a prayer held for Ashley and Miranda, where Scott and Adam were also present. The agents overheard them talking about the missing girls and their desires of staying out of the eyes of law. This raised a lot of eyebrows, so much so that they placed Adam and Scott under surveillance. Just a few days later, the men were caught trying to talk to a young woman and get her inside their car. This was a scenario for a possible abduction, and the agents intervened to make sure that didn't happen. This act gave police enough reason to ask for a polygraph test. Surprisingly, they both passed the polygraph test. Investigators interviewed them for hours and even searched their apartment, but came up empty-handed. Regardless of their creepy behavior, police did not find any evidence to connect them to the missing girls. Days were turning into weeks, and weeks were turning into months without any significant development in the case. Just when the case seemed to be losing momentum, a shocking twist came to light from an unlikely source. Now that the investigators working the case of Ashley and Miranda's disappearance were grasping at straws, they were all in for obtaining information, even when it came from middle school gossip. But they were oblivious to the fact that what started with gossip could change the whole direction of the investigation and reveal an alarming truth. Upon investigating the lead, detectives learned that in August of 2001, prior to her disappearance, Ashley had accused Ward Weaver of taking advantage of her and stopped going to his house. Unfortunately, none of her friends, including Weaver's daughter Mallory, believed her. The only person who had Ashley's back at the time was Miranda. Although the charges were reported, it had gone nowhere and no actions were ever taken. Yet Mallory couldn't let this go. The feud was so serious that it ruined their friendship entirely. Investigators also learned that in the weeks leading up to Miranda's disappearance, she'd warned a couple of her friends from going to the Weavers' house, hinting that the man was dangerous. Investigators were taken aback by this revelation. But this was not the end of the twists in this case. It was just the beginning. When investigators dug deeper, they found that Ward Weaver testified in court for Ashley's father, Wesley Roetger, denying all the accusations thrown at him and calling out the little girl as a liar. But was the seemingly amazing father capable of committing such an unspeakable act? Were the rumors valid enough to believe? Investigators were forced with a tumultuous situation where they had more questions than answers. So in May of 2002, Ward Weaver was invited to the Oregon Police Department to take a polygraph test. Just as it was expected, he miserably failed the test. But other than the polygraph, police had no concrete evidence against this man. The test itself was also useless because polygraph tests are not admissible in a court of law. These tests only helped to shape the investigation, and that's what it did. From a good Samaritan, Ward Weaver became the prime suspect in the blink of an eye. To obtain solid proof, investigators knew they had to look deeper into his past. Ward Weaver III was born April 6, 1963 in Humboldt County, California, to his mother Trish and his father Ward Weaver Jr. In 1967, when Weaver was just 4, his father abandoned the family. Weaver and his 2 sisters stayed with their mother. Shortly after the separation, Trish met her second husband, Bob Boudreau, an abusive alcoholic. In the years that followed, Trish gave birth to 2 more boys. But her second marriage wasn't any happier than her first. Weaver began exhibiting antisocial behavior from a very young age. Driven by his explosive temper, it was almost like he was following in the footsteps of the father figures in his life, which was targeting violence towards the vulnerable. In 1981, Weaver graduated from Marshall High School in Portland and joined the U.S. Navy Reserve. He was discharged the following year for heavy drinking. However, during his short tenure in the Navy, Weaver met his future wife, Maria Stout. Soon, Weaver moved in with his mother and stepfather along with Maria, who soon became pregnant. But the couple did not share a healthy relationship. In December of 1982, Maria gave birth to a son named Francis Weaver. In August 1984, Maria and Weaver got married and soon became parents of their second son, Alex. But even then, fights continued between the couple, resulting in a situation where both of them were taking out their frustration on their children by beating and abusing them. Child Protection Services finally got involved and removed the children from the home for a brief period. During this time, Weaver hoped to reconnect with his biological father. But the decision of getting back to his roots led him to nothing but darkness. Weaver discovered that his father was on trial for double murder he'd committed back in 1981. He killed an 18-year-old Air Force recruit, Robert Radford, and his 23-year-old girlfriend, Barbara Lavoie, near the Mojave Desert in California and buried them in his backyard. In late 1984, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Weaver later regretted that he wasn't called to the stand as a character witness. He'd go on to say that he loved his father and did not want to see him executed. By 1986, Weaver and Maria were living in Fairfield, California, with the Ordona family. On June 15, 1986, Weaver headed out to drink and launched an unprovoked attack on the teenage daughters of the Ordonas, 16-year-old Jennifer and 15-year-old Jocelyn. Weaver was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the assault. During this period, he told a probation officer that his biggest fear was ending up like his father. While Weaver was sent to prison, Maria welcomed their third son. After his release in 1991, Maria gave birth to their fourth child, Mallory. But Weaver and Maria were even more miserable as parents than they were as a couple. It was evident that the marriage was not going to work. In 1993, Maria filed a restraining order against her husband, finally putting an end to their 9-year marriage. In August 1997, Weaver had begun a new romance with a data entry clerk at Laclade Chain, where he worked in shipping. With his new girlfriend, son Francis, and daughter Mallory, Weaver then settled down in the rental house on South Beaver Creek Road in Oregon City. As investigators were busy digging up the dirt of his past, Ward Weaver did something which no one saw coming. To present himself as a person who had been wrongfully targeted by authorities, Ward Weaver took a gamble. On July 3, 2002, he invited reporter Anna Song from the Kadu News Channel for an interview. By allowing the media into his home, Ward Weaver hoped to transfer the limelight towards him, but in a positive way. During the interview, when Anna asked him about his failed polygraph test, he blamed it on the incompetence of the Oregon police. He also stated that he wouldn't be cooperative with the law enforcement anymore.
The fact is, they come back around and want more help from me, I'm done.
He also did not hesitate to openly discuss Ashley's allegations against him. When Anna Song asked him about his opinions on what had happened to the girls, he said that he did not believe they both met the same fate.
I know Ashley ran away, and the fact that the FBI are throwing both of these cases, into someone took them both.
Before leaving, Anna proposed a tour of Weaver's house. After he gave a tour of the inside of his house, he went outside and casually strolled on the concrete slab in his backyard with Anna beside him. Considering what would be discovered later, this video clip is nothing short of a bone-chilling moment frozen in time, an unsettling twist awaiting to be unveiled. Ward Weaver would go on to do multiple interviews claiming that he had no reason to hurt those girls, and he was a victim of the law enforcement's tunnel vision. At one point, he openly claimed before the media that he was ready to pack his bags and leave Oregon forever.
I'm going to go check, a couple places out and see what's got the best chances for jobs, and I'm out of here.
Despite the media circus, authorities were at a standstill. They knew they had to act fast, but they had no substantial evidence. Their potential lead was at a risk of slipping away. While desperately trying to obtain a search warrant, investigators kept their fingers crossed. In a final twist and turn, Ward Weaver himself would provide them the much-awaited chance just 1 month later. On August 13, 2002, a distressing 911 call came into the Oregon Police Department. With fear in her voice, the woman reported how Ward Weaver had assaulted her. The woman was identified as the girlfriend of Francis, Ward Weaver's son. Fortunately, she managed to escape the house and place the 911 call from a nearby convenience store. Police were dispatched to Weaver's house, but by then he'd already fled the scene. A nationwide manhunt was launched to find Weaver, and after a few hours, their perseverance paid off. Around evening time that same day, police finally located Weaver and took him into custody for questioning. Authorities heaved a sigh of relief seeing Weaver wouldn't be able to flee the country or be able to hurt anyone else as long as he was sitting in jail. But the investigation into the disappearance of Ashley and Miranda was not yet over, and investigators were still waiting to be issued a search warrant. Their wait would soon come to an end when another 911 call came in, this time from Weaver's son, Francis. Francis said that he needed to get something off his chest. He then revealed to the police what his father had confided in him a day before.
I need to tell everyone about my father, man. About what he did to those girls.
Okay. What do you think he did?
I know what he did, man. He kidnapped those girls and killed them. This is where I have to stop against my family, man. Me and my brothers aren't like that. We got us in good heart. If I have to, I will testify against my own father.
This call from Francis Weaver broke the case wide open. It was instrumental for the investigators to obtain the search warrant they'd been trying to get for so long. Francis, on the other hand, believed he was doing the right thing, despite the dilemma of turning in his own father. That's why when the FBI informed him that he was not in fact Ward Weaver's biological son, but the result of his mother's affair, he was rather happy. On August 23, 2002, Oregon police, with the assistance of FBI agents, began searching the property. The police crews cordoned off the area, fenced up the property, and put up a few tents to block media from broadcasting the event while they searched for any evidence that could link Weaver to the missing girls. The search extended to the backyard the next day, when police brought the cadaver dogs inside the property. The grasp on hope was loosening at this point, yet the loved ones for both girls wanted nothing more than closure. To the investigators, the backyard was nothing but a creepy horror movie. As they entered the backyard, they were welcomed by a foul odor. There was a shed in the backyard where paper strips were hanging from the ceiling, encrusted with dead flies. In that shed, investigators stumbled upon a cardboard box. Inside the box, human remains were stored. The remains were then taken to the medical examiners for identification. On Sunday, August 24, 2002, FBI personnel came out with the identity of the human remains in a news conference. And this was all Miranda's younger sister could make of this news.
4:15 this afternoon, the Oregon State Medical Examiner has positively identified the remains discovered yesterday as the body of Miranda Gaddis.
While Miranda's remains were found, investigators still had to find Ashley. When they couldn't find anything more in the shed, the task force shifted their attention to other portions of the backyard, especially to a suspicious concrete slab. It was the same concrete slab Weaver was walking on when he was talking to Anna Song in his interview. Breaking through the cement slab, they encountered 3 unusually large barrels. In one of those barrels, another set of human remains was found. The condition of the second set of remains was a lot different than Miranda's. It appeared that they'd been placed in a freezer at some point in time. After searching, they discovered a freezer, which they believed was used for storing the remains. The medical examiner's office eventually concluded that the remains indeed belonged to Ashley Pond. For Ashley's family, too, the news was overwhelming. Ward Weaver, who was already sitting in jail, was indicted for the aggravated murders of Ashley and Miranda. These charges hold the death penalty in the state of Oregon, which Weaver was facing. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Weaver kept denying that he had anything to do with the murders. Needless to say, the people of Oregon City were astounded with the outcome. It was frightening to think that they were putting their children in danger every time they sent them to that predator's house. So naturally, they were curious to see what Weaver had to say about his actions after he'd been unmasked. In early 2003, Anna Song sat with Weaver for a jail interview while he was in custody awaiting trial. She started the interview with the most intriguing question.
Did you kill Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis?
No, I did not.
After he denied murdering the girls, the next question was then, how did their bodies end up at his rental property?
So when you walked me over the concrete slab in July when we did our interview, you had no idea that Ashley Pond's remains were buried underneath it?
None. Nope.
And Weaver, as it seemed, was not going to give in so soon. Regardless of the words coming out of his mouth, his demeanor plainly displayed his lack of remorse. It's unfathomable how a good father and caring citizen from the July 2002 interview had been replaced by a cold-hearted and nonchalant man who would not even acknowledge the dreadful consequences of his own actions. Taking it one step further, he even laughed when the reporter reminded him about his son's claims in his confession. Before summing up the interview, Anna Song asked if he had anything to say to Ashley and Miranda's family members.
To Miranda, or actually to Michelle and her family, yeah, I'm sorry, but this, everybody's barking up the wrong tree on me.
But perhaps he realized his lies were failing to cover up his crimes. Yet instead of keeping his mouth shut, he kept coming in front of the media, even after his lawyers advised against it. On March 27, 2003, Weaver's lawyers filed a motion retracting themselves from the case because Weaver wasn't following their counsel. When new attorneys were appointed, they told the court that they needed another year to prepare for the trial. When everybody thought that there was nothing left in the case but to wait for the trial, Weaver still had a trick up his sleeve. At the beginning of 2004, Weaver began to act erratically. He claimed that he heard voices. His lawyers filed a motion urging a medical evaluation to ensure that he was mentally stable to appear in court. After a few months, the judge declared him unfit to stand trial. On August 25, 2004, Weaver, now heavily medicated, appeared in court again. This time he was deemed fit to stand trial. But Ward Weaver was a man who loved to play games. And he was ready to reveal his final twist. He wanted to plead guilty to the charges and avoid the death penalty in the process. Before the plea bargain was offered to Weaver, it was sent for the approval of the Pond and Gaddis families. Despite their desire to send Weaver to the exact place where their daughters were, they decided to not go through with the depressing ordeal of a long trial. On September 22, 2004, Ward Weaver pleaded guilty to the aggravated murder charges. Before handing down his sentence, the judge passed some thought-provoking words.
When you look at the magnitude of what you've done here, I really just see nothing but evil.
Weaver was sentenced to the maximum penalty possible, which was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, the plea bargain robbed the opportunity for Ashley and Miranda's families to get answers. There was no information about exactly why and how the girls were killed. Perhaps there would have never been a hint of this either, if Miranda's younger sister, Mariah, didn't take it upon herself. In 2009, she met Weaver in jail, hoping for answers that would provide her family with proper closure. Ward Weaver was supposed to be forgotten to the world after this, but he left behind an evil family legacy. In 2016, Ward Weaver's stepson, Francis Weaver, was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the 2014 killing of the Grants Pass man during a drug deal that turned deadly. Perhaps the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Call it a twist of fate or just coincidence, but now 3 generations of the Weaver family are behind bars. The house where Ward Weaver once lived and committed his monstrous acts has now been torn down. Today, the place lies as vacant land, asking us if we really know the people who live among us. Lori and Michelle left Oregon, knowing that the lives of their daughters were taken by a man they once trusted. This was the last time these 2 10-year-old girls were seen before they disappeared. On August 4th, 2002, Holly Wells and her best friend Jessica Chapman left a barbecue at Holly's house unnoticed. Their disappearance sparked one of the biggest manhunts and garnered international interest. However, their story ended in tragedy and led to a suspect hiding in plain sight. But what exactly happened to little Holly and Jessica? Was their disappearance intentional or a random act? Soham is a small market town in Cambridgeshire County, England. It's a charming locality nestled among sprawling farmlands and parks. The town is ideal for raising a family and is known for its quaint Old English architecture. In 1944, the town narrowly escaped disaster during the Second World War when a fire broke out on one of the ammunition trains. Interestingly, though, many archaeological findings from the Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age were discovered in Soham and are now housed in the British Museum. Soham, however, has in recent years found itself overshadowed by a tragic event: the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Holly and Jessica were both born and raised in Soham, Cambridgeshire. Both girls met when they were 4 years old and developed an instant bond. They both attended St. Andrew's Primary School and were also classmates. Those who knew them said they were inseparable and were more like sisters. Holly Marie Wells was born on October 4th, 1991, to parents Nicola and Kevin. She had a younger brother named Oliver. Friends and family described her as having a lovely nature. Jessica Amy Chapman was born to parents Leslie and Sharon on September 1st, 1991. She had 2 older sisters named Rebecca and Allison. Jessica was described as being a bit of a tomboy and enjoyed the outdoors. Jessica was a sporty child who took part in many physical activities. Her parents described her as being lively and well-behaved. She was an avid fan of English football. This was something the girls had in common, as they were both fans of the football club Manchester United, particularly the club's star player David Beckham. Both girls were considered to be responsible and dependable. At around midday of Sunday, August 4th, 2002, Jessica Chapman left her house to visit her friend Holly. Holly's parents were hosting a family barbecue, and Jessica had been invited. Both girls were eager to spend time together as Jessica had just returned from holiday to Menorca in Spain. When Jessica reached Holly's house, she noticed another friend, Natalie Parr, had also been invited over. Natalie left before the barbecue could end, and both Jessica and Holly decided to change their clothes. They matched their attire with replica Manchester United t-shirts and black shorts. They then went downstairs to join the rest of the family outside for the barbecue. Just before dinner at around 5 p.m., Holly's mother wanted to take a picture of the girls in their matching outfits. They then sat down to eat with the other guests before returning to play games in Holly's room. Both girls were growing bored and decided to take a walk to a nearby vending machine at the local sports center to buy some sweets. They left home just after 6:15 p.m. without informing anyone about where they were going. At around 8 p.m., Nicola Wells, Holly's mother, went to call the girls downstairs to wish the guests goodbye. When she couldn't find them, she searched the entire house. Soon she was panicking and told her husband Kevin that the girls were missing. Kevin and Nicola, with the help of their guests, searched the surrounding streets and alleyways, but didn't find any trace of the girls. Nicola waited, knowing that both Holly and Jessica were responsible. Their curfew was 8:30 p.m., and she believed they'd return. The curfew time came and went, but there was still no sign of either girl. Nicola called Jessica's mother Sharon at around 8:45 p.m., hoping the girls had decided to go over to the Chapman's house. But that glimmer of hope was dashed. Neither Sharon nor her husband Leslie had seen either of the girls. Sharon and Leslie decided they too would go out and search the surrounding area for the girls. Both families spent the next hour calling out their names and knocking on the doors of neighbors. There was just no sign of either Holly or Jessica. It was then they decided to call the police and report the girls missing at 10 p.m. that evening. Police launched an immediate and intensive search for both girls. Several search teams were organized to look for any clues of the girls. Police teams also visited the friends of both Holly and Jessica, hoping to discover any information about their whereabouts. No one had seen them, and none of their friends could provide police with possible places the girls could have gone to without telling their parents. As news spread throughout the town, many residents came forward to help with the search. Police and volunteers made their way to the Soham Village College, hoping the girls were just hiding on the high school's grounds. School caretaker Ian Huntley noticed the police and a large group of residents heading toward the school grounds. He then came out and asked the group what was happening. He then discovered that the police were looking for the two girls named Holly and Jessica. Ian then told police he had seen both the girls that same evening. Ian unlocked the school gates to allow search teams in while a few police officers stopped to question him. He explained that he'd been washing his dog in the front yard when both Holly and Jessica had stopped by to talk to Maxine, his fiancée. Maxine was a teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary School, and both Holly and Jessica were very fond of her. Ian told both Holly and Jessica that Maxine had been unwell and was in the shower. They inquired about Maxine's recent job application and asked him if she'd gotten the permanent position. Ian then told them that she'd not. Both Holly and Jessica told Ian to tell Maxine that they were sorry about her not getting the job before leaving and heading toward the library. The search continued throughout the night, but there was no sign of either girl. Over 700 police officers and 500 volunteers gathered the next day on Monday, August 5, 2002, to look for Holly and Jessica. A task force was quickly put together and given the name Operation Fincham. A base for operations was set up on the Soham Village College grounds. There was a palpable fear for the girls. Many people around town knew them and didn't believe that the girls had chosen to run away. Cambridgeshire police released the last photo taken of the girls, in which they were wearing matching Manchester United t-shirts. Their physical descriptions were released to the media. Holly was described as being fair with blonde hair, and Jessica as tanned with shoulder-length brown hair. Both girls were white, slim, and around 4 feet 6 inches in height. Both the Wells and Chapman families spoke at the press conference. They informed the public that Holly and Jessica were both wary of strangers and would not have spoken to any strangers. Police dive teams searched nearby bodies of water while volunteers took to poking through the overgrown grass with sticks. A helicopter fitted with a thermal imaging camera flew over the entire town. Police even asked for help from the local U.S. Air Force Base for help in using their aircraft to search for the girls. Many held on to the hope that the girls had just gone off to have some fun and did not return home out of fear. Police then turned to their idol, David Beckham, and asked if he could send out a message of support. In his message, he encouraged both Holly and Jessica to return home to their parents and that they would not be in trouble. By Wednesday, August 7, 2002, police had conducted 400 door-to-door interviews, stopped over 700 vehicles to search, and received over 2,500 phone calls. There were still no new leads, despite the extensive search. That evening, the community held a candlelight vigil and prayed for the girls' safe return. It was on Thursday, August 8, 2002, when the police gave another press conference. They were able to get a hold of CCTV footage and played this on a national news platform. They also revealed to the public that there had been an eyewitness named Ian Huntley who claimed to have seen the girls shortly before they disappeared. Reporter Jeremy Thompson was curious and decided to interview Ian about his last meeting with the girls.
They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews, and off they walked in the direction of the library over there.
With a lack of leads, police were left with their last option. They needed to interview Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. Ian and Maxine had taken a very active role in the investigation by offering to assist wherever possible. Ian helped coordinate many searches throughout the school grounds, and both he and Maxine gave interviews to eager local reporters. By Saturday, August 10, 2002, police were able to use the CCTV footage showing the girls' movements that Sunday afternoon and reconstruct their movements. The video reconstruction was followed by a plea made by the parents of both Holly and Jessica. It was after this video had been broadcast that phone calls from the public began flooding in. There were over 2,000 phone calls reporting sightings of the girls made by the public. A man named Mark Tuck claimed to have seen the girls walking on Sand Street at 6:30 p.m. on the evening of August 4, 2002. He alleged that he commented to his wife, "Look, there's two little Beckhams over there." Another woman named Karen Greenwood said she'd seen them walking arm in arm 2 minutes later on College Road. Another woman claimed to have seen both girls walking together the next morning past their house in nearby Little Thetford. Police soon realized that many of these leads were turning out to be false. The investigation team made an appeal for young children to avoid wearing Manchester United t-shirts in public. They believed this was one of the causes for the numerous false leads they were getting. Investigators developed a profile of the abductor. They deduced that he may have been a local man or was familiar with the area. He may have a history of being a sex offender and was aged between 25 and 40 years old. It was a broad description, and police soon discovered there were almost 700 men who fit the profile living in and around Soham alone. The police, together with Holly and Jessica's parents, made another attempt to try and find the girls. This time they turned to the media and spoke directly to the abductor.
Give them back. Just give them back. Just put an end to all of this for them.
By now, the media had taken to scrutinizing the work being done by the investigators. They had criticized their ability to solve the case, despite extensive investigations and media focus on the case. To the public, it seemed as though the investigation had hit a dead end and that there was no suspect in sight. The case, it seemed, was about to go cold, and there was nothing that could be done about it. But there was about to be another twist in this tragic tale. Unbeknownst to the public, investigators had already begun looking into someone they suspected. Behind the scenes, police had already begun working their theory that whomever was responsible was living in Soham.
In the last few minutes, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman, both from the Soham area.
The person they suspected was Ian Huntley. Investigators took a keen interest in Ian Huntley and his fiancée, Maxine Carr. Initially, it was due to the fact that both girls had stopped by the house to ask about Maxine, and Ian was the last to see them. Another aspect of their suspicions stemmed from the willingness shown by both Ian and Maxine to grant interviews with the media and help in the search for both Holly and Jessica. Over the course of 2 weeks, police regularly visited the caretaker's home under the guise of it just being a friendly inquiry. Police officers noticed several oddities as they searched the house following their disappearance. One of the officers noted numerous items of clothing hanging out on the washing line despite the rainy weather. Another noticed the immaculate condition of the house and a fresh lemony scent permeating the air. Ian then told officers that they were forced to clean the house because of flooding that occurred in the dining room. Officers also noted that Ian sometimes appeared agitated when speaking about the girls. They were suspicious of him from the onset of the investigation. Another problem investigators had in believing Ian's story came quite early into the investigation. In interviews with police and media, Maxine Carr repeated the same version of events as Ian. She remained his alibi throughout the initial investigation, never changing her story as police checked and rechecked with them over the course of 2 weeks. The issue was that a few days after the girls had disappeared, they received tips about Maxine lying about her whereabouts that evening. 2 days after the news had spread nationally, police had received a call from a woman named Marion Clift. She was a neighbor of Maxine's mother and lived in Grimsby, Lincolnshire. Marion alleged to have seen Ian and Maxine standing and looking at something in the car trunk on Tuesday, August 6, 2002. Ian appeared to be pale and shaky, according to Marion, who said he abruptly closed the car trunk when he noticed her. There were also other tips that had started coming in about Maxine. In the days following the news of the disappearance of the girls, several locals claimed to have spotted Maxine in Grimsby that Sunday. They said she appeared to have been intoxicated and hard to miss. The police kept this information private, hoping to catch the suspects in their own trap. Investigators needed to keep all their cards close to their chest. Any hint of suspicion against Ian or Maxine could have compromised their case. As the circumstantial evidence against Ian and Maxine grew, investigators decided to take a closer look at both their prime suspects. An initial look at their backgrounds provided nothing with regard to criminal records until they dug a little deeper and interviewed people close to the couple. Ian Huntley was born on January 31, 1974. Throughout his school years, Ian was regarded as a loner and an oddball. He was bullied in school and was considered an average learner by his teachers. He often developed friendships with girls a year or so younger than himself. In June 1994, he met Claire Evans. They were married 2 months later in August 1994. Within days of being married, Ian developed a volatile temper, and he soon began to abuse and assault his wife. His marriage fell apart, and as his wife tried to break away from him, he began to emotionally manipulate her by feigning illness. They eventually divorced, and Ian spiraled into a series of crimes against women. 3 of these cases were reported to police, but all 3 girls refused to file criminal charges. In April 1998, he was once again arrested on suspicion of assault against an 18-year-old girl. He claimed that the act was consensual and the charge was dropped. In May 1998, another 18-year-old girl reported that Ian had attacked and assaulted her. He was charged and remanded in jail for a week. After CCTV evidence showed that the two had been socializing in a nightclub with each other, the prosecution dropped the charge based on insufficient evidence to convict him of non-consensual relations. Rumors began to spread, however, and Ian was fired from his job. Another case involving the assault of an 11-year-old girl was reported to police in July 1998, but there was nothing to corroborate the claim, and so the charges were dropped. Maxine Carr was born on February 16, 1977. She was the second of 2 daughters, and her parents were divorced. Her family often found themselves in financial difficulties, but somehow managed to get by. In school, she was considered an outcast and had performed poorly academically, but she always aspired to be a teacher. In her teenage years, she'd become insecure about herself due to weight gain and being unpopular. As she grew older, she developed eating disorders to lose weight and began craving the attention of boys. After finishing school, Maxine worked with her mother at a fish processing factory before attending Grimsby Institute for further and higher education and general care. She'd worked at a care home before returning to the fish processing plant. Colleagues remarked that she often spoke about wanting to become a teacher. In February 1999, Ian met Maxine Carr at a nightclub, and the two developed an instant attraction. Within 4 weeks, Maxine had moved in with Ian. According to family, they were eager to start a family and were engaged by June 1999. In July 1999, though, Ian once again got into trouble when another woman accused him of assault. Maxine provided Ian with an alibi, and Ian provided a DNA sample to investigators. The woman, however, eventually dropped the charges, claiming that Ian had not been the perpetrator. All seemed to be going on well, and to the outside world, Maxine and Ian seemed to be in love and happy. But Ian was possessive, and Maxine seemed to thrive off of this affection. Both Ian and Maxine conducted several affairs while they were together, and on several occasions, Maxine returned to her mother's home. It became a regular occurrence. Ian and Maxine would fight, then she'd leave, and he'd call her until she caved into his demands and returned. By 2001, Ian and Maxine had decided to give their relationship a fresh start and decided to relocate to Soham, Cambridgeshire. Ian got a job as a caretaker at Soham Village College in September 2001. He used the alias Ian Nixon and was able to get away without the school board discovering his colorful past. He was also able to secure residency at the caretaker's cottage next door to the school. In February 2002, Ian was able to find Maxine a part-time volunteer position at St. Andrew's Primary School as a teacher's assistant. It was a volunteer position, and Maxine had lied about her qualifications. She, however, got the post and became the teaching assistant to Holly and Jessica's teacher. When she applied for a full-time position at the school in July 2002, she was subsequently turned down. Investigators were now aware of the turbulent relationship between Ian and Maxine, as well as their troubled pasts. To police, the couple showed tendencies towards recklessness when faced with major dilemmas in their lives. Ian's past sexual offenses and his harassment of younger girls did not help his case. Added to that was Maxine's ability to overlook many of Ian's indiscretions and provide alibis when he needed it the most. Everything the police had, though, was circumstantial at best. There was no physical evidence linking Ian and Maxine to the girls' murders, only theories. The closest clue that they discovered had been the cell phone records of Jessica's phone. Its last known location had been somewhere near Ian and Maxine's residence. This was not enough, as it could have been proven that the girls were abducted after speaking to Ian, which he freely admitted. Police took to using other methods to create an air of suspicion within the community. They organized a town meeting at the college hall on August 15, 2002, and invited all residents. It was designed to rattle Ian. At the meeting, they provided all the details they had so far. This included the profile of the suspected abductor and the possibility that he may be hidden within their community. They asked all those who attended if they'd noticed anyone doing anything out of the ordinary that Sunday afternoon. They encouraged everyone to take a closer look at their neighbors and scrutinize anything and everything their neighbors did. Investigators hoped this plan would work. On Monday, August 16, 2002, investigators once again paid Ian and Maxine a visit. They had enough circumstantial evidence, but it still wasn't enough to prove their guilt. Instead, they wanted to question them again and present their new findings, hoping it would break one of them into confessing their involvement with the girl's disappearance. The couple had not been placed under arrest by police, although they had their suspicions. They were interviewed separately in 2 separate locations outside of Soham for 7 hours. Maxine was asked about the many tips they received that she'd been seen in Grimsby on the night of August 4, 2002. She denied these allegations and stuck to her original story. Ian, too, was questioned and stuck to his story by dodging leading questions and maintaining he only tried to help find the girl. At the station, they had asked Ian to provide his fingerprints and DNA samples as part of the investigation routine. Afterwards, Ian and Maxine were released at around 9:30 p.m. that evening. Police set them up at a local motel, telling them they needed to conduct a thorough search of the house as it was standard procedure. The room had been bugged, but the couple said nothing that could incriminate them. In the meantime, investigators swept through Ian's home on 5 college clothes. The house had been remarkably clean. Police looked through several drawers and discovered Ian's set of keys for the grounds of the schoolyard. They turned their attention to searching the grounds of the school and were able to open a locker to which Ian previously stated he did not have the keys. What investigators were about to discover was undoubtedly going to seal the fate of their suspect. Inside, they discovered a bin bag, and within it, the charred remains of 2 Manchester United t-shirts. There was no doubt the girls had met a fatal and tragic end. On August 17, 2002, at 4:30 a.m., both Ian and Maxine were arrested for the abduction and murder of both Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman.
In the last few hours, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman have been arrested.
Ian refused to answer questions and feigned mental illness to avoid further interrogation. He was sent to a mental hospital to undergo psychological investigation. Maxine, on the other hand, confessed that she'd been lying about her whereabouts on August 4, 2002. She went on to tell investigators that Ian was worried after he heard the girls had disappeared and thought he'd be blamed. She alleged that Ian called her after the girls had disappeared, fearing he would be blamed. Ian allegedly told Maxine that both girls had been inside the house and touched things before leaving. When he heard they'd disappeared, he believed police would come after him because of his past offenses. Maxine said she'd agreed to cover up to help save Ian from persecution. Police did not reveal to Maxine the evidence they discovered, hoping she would tell them the truth on her own. At 12:30 p.m. on August 17, 2002, 48-year-old gamekeeper Keith Pryor discovered the bodies of 2 little girls lying side by side. They were found in a 5-foot-deep irrigation ditch near the perimeter fence of the RAF Lakenheath base in Suffolk. Pryor and his friend Adrian Lawrence immediately called police to report the discovery. When police arrived, they knew they'd found the remains of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman.
We are certain, as we possibly can be tonight, the 2 bodies, that they are those of Holly and Jessica.
They'd been badly burned and disfigured. The bodies were discovered 10 miles away from their home in Soham. The bodies of both girls were taken to the coroner's office for autopsy. Examiners hypothesized that the probable cause of death was asphyxiation. The bodies had been dumped in an attempt to cover up the crime, but tissue samples provided an estimated time of death to be around 2 weeks. DNA had to be extracted from both bodies to determine and confirm their identities due to the damage caused by the burning. It was also determined by both the investigators and the coroner that the girls had been killed elsewhere and thereafter placed in the ditch. This was due to the lack of burn marks at the crime scene and the debris found on the girls' bodies at the autopsy. Services were held for the girls throughout the nation as a show of support for the family in their time of mourning. Holly Wells was laid to rest on September 3, 2002, and Jessica Chapman was cremated on September 4, 2002. Having discovered the bodies, investigators now began working with the physical evidence they'd found. Testing of the bin bag showed that Ian's fingerprints were left all over the bag. Fibers and DNA were recovered from the items discovered, and police were able to positively match these to Ian Huntley's clothing and carpeting from his house. Ian's car was also searched, and investigators noted that the interior had been well cleaned. A cover from the rear seat had been missing, and the lining of the car trunk had been replaced with an ill-fitted carpet piece. Despite the cleaning, traces of mud, brick dust, chalk, and concrete were found on the pedals and wheel arches of the car. These matched the same type of concrete used to pave the road leading up to where the girls were found. Investigators had their physical evidence. it was now time to recreate the events of the evening. Investigators believe that after Holly and Jessica left the Wells residence, they made their way to the sports center. They'd spent some time inside the area before setting off on their way back home to Holly's house. This can be confirmed by the CCTV footage that was discovered after they went missing. Afterwards, they stopped at the home of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. Both girls, according to reports, inquired after Maxine and her job application. From here, investigators believe that Ian lured them into the house with ulterior motives, perhaps assault. When the girls tried to escape, Ian attacked and incapacitated both girls, then proceeded to strangle them in a fit of rage as he was prone to. Afterwards, he tried to contact Maxine, and when she failed to answer, he decided to get rid of the girls' bodies. He removed their clothes because it would make it easier to identify them. It's then assumed that before the search could begin, Ian took the girls' bodies to a remote location to burn them before transporting the bodies to the irrigation ditch near Lakenheath, as he knew the area well from the time he began his hobby of plane spotting. When he returned home, he tried to burn the clothes, but the smoke may have been too visible, so he put out the fire and stuffed everything into a bin bag and locked it in the school storage hangar. He then scrubbed the house down, trying to remove all evidence before having a bath himself. Afterwards, he joined in the search to throw off suspicion. For the next 2 weeks, Ian and his fiancée Maxine continued to put up the pretense that they'd only tried to help. The trial began on November 5, 2003 at the Old Bailey. Ian was being charged with 2 counts of murder. Maxine was being charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. The jury were presented with the evidence and the circumstantial findings that led to Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr's arrest. His criminal past was also brought forward and painted the picture of a man who had a motive to lure the 2 girls into his house. They also heard from Ian, who defended himself, declaring that both girls had died accidentally. He alleged that he tried to help Holly stop her nosebleed and accidentally knocked her into the bathtub. She drowned after being knocked unconscious. Jessica, he said, had started screaming and in his panicked state tried to stop her from screaming and accidentally suffocated her. When asked why he didn't call emergency services, he said that he wondered if police would believe him and opted to cover up their deaths. Maxine testified that she tried to help Ian because he was being wrongfully accused of a crime he did not commit. She cited his past offenses as the reason for the cover-up. Maxine then said she would not have stood by Ian if she believed it was possible for him to have murdered the girls. The trial lasted almost 6 weeks, and on December 17, 2003, Ian Huntley was charged with the murders and given 2 life sentences. He'll have to remain in prison for a minimum of 40 years before being considered for parole. Maxine Carr was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her role in the murders. She was released on probation after serving 24 months in prison on May 14, 2004. She's since changed her identity to safeguard herself from vigilante attacks by civilians. On April 3, 2003, the house on 5 College Close was officially demolished. For the families of Holly and Jessica, their memories still live on. There's still the feeling of emptiness as loved ones wonder what could have been for both girls. For them, 2 bright lights were extinguished by a monster who should have been locked away years before he set foot in Soham. It was a quiet Tuesday evening on December 3, 1957, in Sycamore, Illinois. Best friends 7-year-old Maria and 8-year-old Kathy enjoyed themselves while playing in the first snowfall of winter. They remained blissfully unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. As they giggled and played a game of Duck the Cars, the young man made his way toward them, charming his way into their little group. In the next few moments, both their lives and those of their families would be forever changed. But who was the stranger? And what were his intentions?
She took a piggyback ride from him, got on his back I came out without mittens on, so my hands were cold, and I went home to get mittens. When I came back, Johnny and Maria were nowhere to be seen.
Police were out with spotlights and the megaphone.
The police all started showing up, asking the same questions over and over and over.
Sycamore, Illinois has been home to the annual Sycamore Pumpkin Festival since 1962, after resident Wally Thoreau began displaying pumpkins on his front lawn. Named after the sycamore tree, the city is considered a good place to live and raise a family due to its affordability. It's a green city and has many wide-open spaces and parks. And, like other cities, Sycamore too has its share of crime, but has seen a decline in the last decade. The Sycamore of 1957, though, was a far cry from what we see now. Back then, the worst crimes were obscene graffiti drawn on sidewalks, until a crime that shook all Americans occurred. And that is the story we take a closer look at today, the disappearance and murder of Maria Ridulph. Maria Elizabeth Ridulph was born on March 2, 1950, to parents Michael and Frances Ridulph. She was the youngest of 4 children with 2 older sisters, Kay and Pat, and an older brother named Chuck. She lived in Sycamore, Illinois with her family. Her father worked at a factory while her mother was a homemaker. Being the youngest, Maria was doted upon by her family. Her easy smile, brown eyes, and tinkling laughter made people gravitate towards her naturally. She was also a rather nervous child who her mother described as high-strung and prone to hysterics if she found herself in trouble. Maria was a diligent young girl and attended Sunday school every week. In 1957, Maria was in the 2nd grade at West Elementary School in Sycamore. The 7-year-old was a well-behaved child who achieved good grades and made many friends. Her teachers described her as having big, expressive brown eyes and loud, cheerful laughter. Her best friend was her neighbor, 8-year-old Kathy Sigmund. Both girls were very close. They walked to and from school daily and often spent time together over at each other's houses. It was the first snowfall of the season, and both girls were looking forward to the coming holidays. On December 3, 1957, both Maria and Kathy spent their afternoon making paper snowflakes at Maria's house. At around 5 p.m., Kathy left to go home for dinner with her family. Maria and her family too sat down and prepared to have a meal. Maria, though, was not really hungry, so after eating just enough, she begged her parents to let her go outside. In 1957, the neighborhood in which Maria lived was considered very safe. People didn't lock their doors, and robberies were not common. Although it was dark, Maria's parents allowed her to go outside. She then called Kathy's home to ask if she could also come out and play in the snow. Both girls met near a large tree on the corner of Center Cross Street and Archie Place. They decided to play a game called Duck the Cars, in which they hid behind a tree every time they saw headlights approaching. It was while playing this game that a young man caught their attention. He approached them and introduced himself as Johnny. He told both girls he was 24 years old and unmarried. He then asked them if they enjoyed piggyback rides and dolls. Maria and Kathy responded with a yes, and he offered them both a piggyback ride, which Kathy declined. After a while, Maria ran back home to fetch one of her dolls while Kathy waited outside with Johnny. When she got her doll, Johnny gave Maria a piggyback ride. Growing cold, Kathy said that she wanted to go home to fetch some mittens and asked Maria to come along with her. Maria said she wanted to stay with Johnny, and so Kathy returned to her house before going back out to play with Maria on the road. However, when she came back to the spot, both Maria and Johnny had disappeared.
She took a piggyback ride from him, got on his back. I came out without mittens on, so my hands were cold, and I went home to get mittens. When I came back, Johnny and Maria were nowhere to be seen.
At first, Kathy tried calling out for Maria, but got no response. Unsure of what to do, Kathy went to the Ridulph house and told Maria's parents what had happened. Maria's brother Chuck left home to look for her around the neighborhood and was accompanied by his friend Randy, who had been over at the Ridulph's house. Both boys called out for Maria, but could not find her anywhere. In the meanwhile, Michael escorted Kathy back home. Once home, Kathy told her mother, Flora, about what happened and the man they met called Johnny. Flora called Frances and told her to contact the police, but Michael was hesitant. This was because Maria had gone missing a year earlier and was later discovered to be playing in a cemetery as she'd wandered off absent-mindedly and lost track of time. Maria eventually returned home after the incident before a search could be organized. Michael didn't want to create another panic. Maria's mother, Frances, though, did not have the same belief as her husband and instead drove to the police station to report Maria missing. At first, Chuck too was not as invested in finding Maria, as he believed she would eventually turn up at the house when she grew tired and scared. That was until he found the doll Maria had taken from home lying on the side of a neighbor's garage. He knew Maria loved her dolls and wouldn't return home without them. He grabbed the doll and returned home to tell his father. The discovery put Maria's family on edge, and within an hour, a search party of police officers and armed civilians set out to look for Maria. They knocked on neighbors' doors and searched through alleyways and parks, calling out for Maria. Hundreds of volunteers came out to search for Maria and the man they called Johnny. The women joined in by helping make coffee and sandwiches to distribute to those conducting the search. After hours of searching, they could not locate either Maria or Johnny. But no one had given up just yet. As the search continued, police questioned Kathy about what happened that evening before Maria disappeared. Kathy repeated her experience to police about how Maria disappeared. She was able to give the police a description. Kathy described Johnny as being light-haired, being in his early 20s, a gap between his front teeth, tall with a slender chin, and wearing a brightly colored sweater with green, blue, and yellow stripes. The next day, local newspaper headlines covered the mysterious disappearance of Maria and Johnny. Articles provided a description of both Maria and her alleged kidnapper. Maria's parents turned to the media in order to get the attention of the kidnapper. They pleaded with the kidnapper to return their daughter. Through interviews, Maria's mother, Frances, urged her to stay calm and promised they would be together again soon. Police continued the physical search, checking car trunks and cellars for any sign of Maria. Every house in the town was searched, but there was nothing. After 2 days, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the search as well, with fear growing that Maria may have been taken across state lines. The story became a national sensation, and in time, both J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, and the United States President, Dwight Eisenhower, took a personal interest in the case, requesting regular updates about the progress. No resources were spared in the search for Maria, as aircraft flew over the town searching for the little girl and her kidnapper. They even went as far as to drain a lake and set off explosives at a local quarry in hopes of finding traces of Maria, but there was nothing. Police started to believe that whomever killed Maria was not a local, but rather someone from out of town. They waited to hear from the kidnapper, but no ransom demand or communication ever came through, and they began to fear the worst. A week after Maria's disappearance, investigators began telling search groups to keep an eye out for large flocks of carrion birds who might be feasting on a possible decomposing body. Being the only witness, Kathy was placed in protective custody, and investigators continued to show her pictures of possible suspects. She could never truly find a picture that matched with Johnny, and after multiple photo lineups, she started to grow confused. Eventually, Kathy picked out a picture of a 35-year-old man named Thomas Joseph Rivard. For investigators in the family, it was a relief. They were certain that they'd finally found their suspect. Rivard, however, had a solid alibi. He was in prison at the time of the kidnapping. He was also much older than the man named Johnny, who had identified himself as being 24 years old when he met both girls. It had been disappointing, as their only eyewitness had been wrong after all. Kathy remained in protective custody, as investigators believed that Johnny might return to silence her. It was during this time that investigators came across another lead. Their hopes were reignited when police received another promising lead. someone had finally given them a name of another possible suspect. On December 6, 1957, a woman phoned the police claiming that her neighbor, who was a young man named Trashner, fit the killer's description. Records, however, didn't show anyone by the name of Trashner living in the area, but there was a family who went by the surname Tessier. On December 8, 1957, FBI agents visited the Tessier residence. Both Ralph and Eileen Tessier agreed that their eldest son John fit the description of the suspect, but he'd been in Rockford, 40 miles away at the time of the kidnapping. This was confirmed by phone records that proved the Tessiers did receive a call at around 7 p.m. that evening, and the operator at the time recorded the caller as being John Tessier. According to them, John had called from Rockford requesting a ride from his stepfather, Ralph. John was taken in for questioning by investigators. He explained that on December 2nd and 3rd, 1957, he'd been in Chicago undergoing physical examinations because he wanted to enlist in the U.S. military. On the morning of December 3rd, 1957, he visited the Chicago Recruiting Center, and records corroborated his statement. He then spent the day sightseeing in Chicago before returning to Rockford by train that same evening. According to John, he arrived in Rockford around 6:45 p.m. and called his parents for a ride home. He then visited the Rockford recruiting station to drop off paperwork. This was once again corroborated with officials who made note of meeting with John after 7 p.m. that evening. However, they noted that John seemed out of sorts and agitated as if he'd been coming down from a drug trip. The next step investigators took was to conduct a lie detector test at the police station. Given that John seemed to tick all the boxes in their investigation, his authenticity needed to be verified. John passed the lie detector test. Given his positive result and the alibi, the FBI struck John off the suspect list. On December 11, 1957, John left Sycamore and enlisted in the Lackland Air Force Base to begin his basic training. The investigators' one lead had seemingly proven false, and the search for Maria continued well through the festive season and into spring. The Ridulph family remained in a state of limbo. They were uncertain of whether to hold on to hope that Maria and her abductor would be found. On April 26, 1958, the case took a tragic turn. A couple foraging for mushrooms near Woodbine, Illinois, came across skeletal remains near a fallen tree. Initially, they believed it to be that of a small animal or dog. On closer inspection, they saw that it was the remains of a small child. The body was still clothed in a shirt, undershirt, and white socks. They called authorities immediately from the nearest farmhouse. When police arrived, they took note of the state of decomposition and deduced that the body had been left there for months. James Furlong, who was the coroner at the time, instructed crime scene technicians to take general location pictures and not any of the child, as he did not want these images to somehow be leaked to the press. Investigators already suspected who the body might belong to, and after conducting an examination, Maria Ridulph was positively identified through her dental records, the shirt that she'd been wearing, and a lock of hair. She'd been discovered 5 months later and over 100 miles away from her home in Sycamore. The rest of Maria's clothing was never found. An autopsy could not properly identify a cause of death. However, it was ruled as a homicide. Given that Maria was found within the state of Illinois, the FBI withdrew from the case and left the investigation solely to state and local police. Maria Ridulph was laid to rest later that week at the Elmwood Cemetery in Sycamore. Her funeral was attended by over 300 people. Her family and friends were left devastated by the tragedy. She'd been a bright light snuffed out by a monster. With their hearts heavy, they prayed justice would prevail. She was remembered as an intelligent and fun-loving girl by those who gave tributes at her funeral. The hymn, "Jesus Loves Me," was played during the service as it was Maria's favorite. After the funeral, Kathy remained in protective custody. Her life had changed irrevocably. People called her the girl who was last seen with Maria. It became difficult for Kathy to make new friends, as many were scared. The lives of everyone were forever changed by the tragedy of Maria Ridulph's murder. The large tree that Maria and Kathy had played under that fateful evening was cut down a year after Maria went missing. Investigators continued to pursue the case, but it would eventually grow cold. With no new leads and their closest possible suspect eliminated, there was nothing more that could be done. It remained open as a cold case, but other newer cases took priority, and soon Maria's murder became a haunting memory for those left behind in the aftermath of the tragedy. It was a disappointment for the Ridulph family. The hope they flourished briefly in their hearts was extinguished by another false lead. The case had hit a brick wall and remained frozen for decades. Another 40 years would pass before a new lead emerged in the case. After 4 decades, a case that haunted not only the Ridulph family, but Sycamore as a whole had a suspect. In 1997, Sycamore Police Lieutenant Patrick Solar put through the name of another suspect. He suggested that William Henry Redmond, a former truck driver and carnival worker, had been responsible for the death of Maria Ridulph. Redmond, however, had passed away in 1992, but Solar believed that Redmond fit the profile due to his criminal history. According to Solar, Redmond had told fellow inmates that he committed a crime similar to the abduction of Maria Ridulph. Solar also believed that Redmond's appearance and behavior matched the suspect known as Johnny. Solar's investigation and subsequent report was criticized due to the lack of supporting evidence, and he himself agreed that it was merely circumstantial. The case was thereafter labeled as closed but not solved, which left the possibility that a better suspect may one day be found. Although decades had passed, Kathy never forgot the nightmare. She suffered from a syndrome known as survivor's guilt, said psychologists. When she grew up, she eventually moved away from Sycamore after meeting a man named Mark Chapman in the early 70s. After marriage, Kathy and Mark moved to Texas, then Florida. They raised their 3 children there. But the memory never quite left Kathy, and she always thought about that evening and if Johnny was still out there waiting for her. Kathy and her family eventually moved back to Illinois. By the mid-2000s, many referred to Maria's disappearance and death as Sycamore's 9/11, as it had changed the face of the town forever. Decades passed before investigators were alerted to a scintillating clue, a newly discovered lead that was about to heat up the ice-cold case. In 2008, 51 years after the disappearance and murder of Maria Ridulph, investigators were presented with new information. The case was about to take an unexpected turn. Things that had been buried along with Maria back in 1958 began to resurface. Janet Tessier, the half-sister of John Tessier, had sent an email to the Sycamore police tip line. The email implicated her half-brother John as being responsible for the abduction and murder of 7-year-old Maria Ridulph. In the email, she explained that her mother Eileen had made a confession on her deathbed.
She grabbed my wrist in the strongest grip. She said those 2 little girls and the one disappeared. John did it, and you have to tell someone.
And Janet did just that. After her mother had passed away on January 23, 1994, she'd made numerous calls to the Sycamore Police Department, who told her to leave the case alone. She then contacted the FBI, who referred her to the Sycamore Police to deal with the case. For the next 14 years, Janet tried reaching out on several occasions, and she finally got the attention of detectives Larry Cott and Brian Hanley, who decided to reopen the case. In her email, she explained the events of that fateful December night. In her email, Janet told the detectives that John had changed his name to Jack Daniel McCullough in honor of their late mother. Detectives began looking into the claims made by Janet and discovered that John did indeed change his name to Jack Daniel McCullough in 1994. It was now time for them to start their own investigation into who Jack McCullough really was. Jack McCullough was born John Cherry on November 27, 1939, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. His father was a British sergeant named Samuel Cherry, who married his mother Eileen just before the Second World War. His father was killed early in the war, and his mother Eileen went on to become one of the first female airplane spotters with the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force. It was during this time she met Ralph Tessier, who was serving with the United States 8th Army Air Force. John had lived away from London during the height of the war with his grandparents. In November 1944, Ralph and Eileen married and relocated with John when he was 7 years old to Sycamore, Illinois. They had 6 more children, and John took the name of Tessier, but sometimes called himself John Cherry. The Tessier family lived about 2 blocks from the Ridulph home in Sycamore. John, according to his siblings, was his mother's favorite, and she often covered for him when he got into trouble. He was expelled from school in the 10th grade after pushing a teacher and calling her an obscene name. His mother allegedly overlooked the incident. At the time of Maria's disappearance, John was 18 years old and still living with his parents while he'd been making plans to enlist with the U.S. Air Force. This had all been covered in the previous interviews conducted by investigators back in 1957, and John had been cleared as a suspect by the FBI and Sycamore Police Department. The new claims had prompted the new detectives into digging a bit deeper into John Tessier's past. Detectives spoke to John's half-sisters, Catherine and Janine Tessier, who claimed that they heard their mother speaking to police the night Maria disappeared. They alleged Eileen had lied to police about John being home that night. But the most explosive confessions were yet to unfold. John allegedly harassed Janine while he lived with the family. John also developed a bad reputation in the neighborhood. A witness named Pamela Long came forward, claiming her father had once had to intervene when John refused to put her down after giving her a piggyback ride.
I was about 8 years old, and so we were playing on the screened-in porch. He said, "Would you like to go for a piggyback ride with Johnny?" And I said, yes. We went all the way up the street, a block, turned left, went down a block, and my dad came rushing over, jerked me off Johnny's shoulders, told him to never go near his daughter again, or so help me. My dad thought he was very strange and scared him.
Soon after John had left to join the Air Force, his family had become estranged from him. He told them not to attend their mother's funeral. John had spent 13 years in the U.S. military, retiring as a captain. He left the service and moved to Seattle, Washington, where he attended and graduated from the police academy in June 1974. John then joined the Lacey Police Department before transferring to the Milton Police Department in Washington. Here he clashed with the police chief, who had proof of his constant misconduct. Several women claimed that John had harassed them, but the final nail in his coffin came from the testimony of Michelle Weinman, who had been 15 years old in 1982. Weinman was a known runaway who had known John as a Milton police officer. John offered her accommodation. Weinman alleged that John had been inappropriate with her, and she formally charged John with abuse. John was charged with a felony initially, but after plea negotiations, the charge was dropped to a misdemeanor, and he pled guilty to communication with a minor for immoral purposes. He was sentenced to 1 year of formal probation and was officially terminated from the Milton Police Department on March 10, 1982. Thereafter, John formally changed his name to Jack McCullough on April 27, 1994. He then became an amateur photographer until 2001. The only piece of evidence holding John's alibi in place was the phone call made from Rockford on the night of December 3, 1957. But this evidence was about to fall apart after investigators made contact with a former girlfriend of John. During the initial investigation, police were never able to provide their witness, Kathy Sigmund, with a photo of John Tessier. He dropped out of school, therefore there is no picture of him in the yearbook. However, in reopening the investigation, they made contact with his former girlfriend, Jen Swafford. She was able to provide investigators with a more contemporary picture of John. Unknowingly, Jen was about to give investigators evidence that was going to blow the entire case wide open. She handed police an unused military-issued train ticket from Rockford to Chicago. This led police to believe that John had used his own car to drive to Chicago from Rockford. He did claim to have spent the day of December 3, 1957, sightseeing in Chicago. It also led them to believe that John could possibly have driven to Sycamore that afternoon, kidnapped Maria, and returned to Rockford in the allotted time frame. Police went back to review the timeline. Several witnesses had claimed that they had not seen Maria or Kathy playing outside after 6:20 p.m. that evening. This included a bus driver who said that he'd not seen any girls outside when he took that specific turn at around 6:30 p.m. Another witness said he'd seen John's Pontiac in and around Sycamore the evening Maria disappeared. The witness added that he knew for a fact that John never allowed anyone else to drive his car. The statements from the recruiters placed John back in Rockford at around 7 p.m., and given the distance between the areas, it was possible he could have been in Sycamore that evening. Added to that, one of the recruiters he met on December 4th, 1957, had noticed John had a cut lip. He alleged that John then commented that it was a good thing he'd not been in Sycamore the night before after the young girl had disappeared. This statement, along with the other witnesses at the time, had been included in the FBI's initial investigation. But now the new team of investigators worked on the theory that the timeline from the original investigation was completely wrong. Working with the new timeline, investigators developed the theory that John had driven to Sycamore, kidnapped Maria at around 6:20 p.m., and returned to Rockford in order to make the call to his family. A testimony from John's half-sister Catherine backed up the theory that the timeline was warped, as she remembered the police search beginning at 7 p.m. that night. She claimed to have returned from a party and saw the search in progress, bringing the original timeline over an hour earlier than previously believed. They then turned to their only eyewitness, Kathy Sigmund Chapman. Kathy was shown several possible suspect photos, and this time it included the photo of John Tessier from his former girlfriend.
After Maria disappeared, my parents always said, "You are the only one that can recognize this man. You have to remember what he looks like till we find him."
She immediately identified John as the man she believed was Johnny from all those years ago. On June 29, 2011, 71-year-old John Tessier, who now went by the name Jack McCullough, was taken into custody by officers from the Seattle Police Department and interrogated. Given his background in law enforcement, he was interrogated by well-trained interviewers and vehemently denied having anything to do with the kidnapping and murder of Maria. He claimed that Maria was a well-loved child in their neighborhood.
And like you said, this is like 9/11, Kennedy. I mean, this was huge in Sycamore. Am I right?
I'm going to tell you something. I did not kidnap that little girl. I did. Look at my eyes. I did not have anything to do with that little girl.
Okay.
She was loved in the neighborhood. She was a little Mexican girl with big brown eyes, and she was sweet as could be, hardly said a word to anybody, and everyone loved her.
Okay.
This was crushing for the entire
for
city.
Community.
And
Absolutely.
it was crushing for me as well, because I knew the family.
Okay. All right.
When asked about his inappropriate behavior with his half-sister, he denied the allegation and claimed it was just two youngsters fooling around when they were younger. As more questions of Maria's disappearance came up, Jack became evasive and refused to answer anymore. He was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and extradited to Illinois. For the remaining members of the Ridulph family, justice for Maria had finally been served.
I have no sympathy for Jack being in prison, because I believe with all my heart that he is guilty.
It didn't matter that decades had passed. They now had a name, and their fight for answers was coming to a close. On July 27, 2011, Jack appeared in court the same day Maria's body was exhumed by investigators. A forensic anthropologist was able to determine that Maria had in fact been stabbed at least 3 times in the throat by marks found on her bones. Stabbing was therefore considered a likely cause of death, as the state of decomposition could not allow coroners from the original investigation to determine a definite cause. The arrest garnered nationwide interest, and pressure was put on Clay Campbell, who was at the time the DeKalb County State Attorney, by both the Ridulph and Tessier families. He was reluctant due to the age of the case and lack of physical evidence tying Jack to the murder, but eventually he agreed. Jack McCullough was formally charged with Maria Ridulph's abduction and murder, and the case went to trial in September 2012. now aged 73, Jack McCullough went to trial. The prosecution argued that Jack was attracted to Maria given his clear memories of the girl that stemmed from obsession. They were never able to prove if Jack assaulted Maria before her death, but argued that new evidence suggested she was stabbed. Several witnesses took the stand, testifying to Jack's reputation and the numerous instances of misconduct he displayed in his youth and as a police officer in the years following. 3 inmates also gave their testimony, each of which differed from the other, particularly in the manner in which Maria was murdered. One testified she'd been strangled with a wire. Another said she'd been smothered to keep her from screaming. In the end, Kathy Sigmund Chapman took the stand and testified that Jack McCullough was indeed the man she remembered as Johnny. Jack's defense team argued that the case was only reopened due to pressure from both the Ridulph and Tessier families. They stated that there is no physical evidence, motive, or indication that Jack had been responsible for Maria's abduction and murder. Their defense hinged on the possibility of impaired memories and changing testimonies by witnesses.
An investigation attempted to do was use memories and emotion to change the timeline of the abduction.
After much deliberation, the jury presented their findings to the judge, and Jack McCullough was found guilty of the abduction and murder of Maria Ridulph on September 14, 2012. He was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole in 20 years. But just as the Ridulph family breathed a sigh of relief that Maria's killer had been caught, the case took another twisted turn. Though most thought it was done, the case wasn't quite over. On February 13, 2015, Jack appealed his convictions. The Illinois Appellate Court vacated his kidnapping conviction due to the kidnapping of an infant being outside the 3-year statute of limitations, but upheld the murder charge. The court also found that the deathbed confession should not have been used as evidence, but found that the judge's decision did not rely on the statement when making his decision. In 2015, Jack once again filed a petition to have his murder conviction overturned. He was successful in filing a motion that allowed him to have a hearing with the state attorney's office. New state attorney Richard Schmack took over the case and reopened the case by conducting an extensive review of the evidence, including subpoenaed phone records from the night in question. At a court hearing in March 2016, Schmack argued that the phone records, the timelines of the original investigation, a failure to include the original evidence in the trial, and added to that the weather conditions on the night of December 3, 1957, could not have allowed for Jack to be in Sycamore at the time of Maria's disappearance. It was also found that before beginning the new polygraph test, Jack had requested that investigators stick to questions pertaining to the 1957 case. When the interviewer went off topic, Jack passed over the questions, refusing to answer. Jack's prosecution argued that in the interview, he was still asked questions not pertaining to the Maria Ridulph case. They believe the polygraph was used to create a prejudiced view that would paint Jack as a bad person. The judgment therefore found that Jack had been truthful about his involvement in the Maria Ridulph case in both the 1957 polygraph test and the second test conducted in 2011. All other information was irrelevant to the investigation. Following the March 2016 trial, Judge William Brady vacated Jack's murder conviction on April 15, 2016, and requested a new trial.
Sign an order vacating the judgment of conviction. These new factors may not have raised to the level of a reasonable probability of a different result. But collectively, when they are agreed to by the state, in other words, the parties have agreed that these allegations are are true, this court does believe the defendant has met his burden under both the post-conviction petition and the 214-01 petition, and it will grant the request for a new trial.
Jack was released on bond that day. Judge Brady declared that should a new prosecutor wish to challenge the conviction, Jack could stand trial for murder once again. On August 5, 2016, Judge Brady denied the motion for a special prosecutor based on a petition brought forward by Charles Ridulph, Maria's brother. Charles therefore stated that he would not be appealing the ruling.
I didn't get the notice of this until this morning via email. I prayed for forgiveness because of my anger, and I prayed for the Lord to enable me to rejoice that Maria is above this.
On April 12, 2017, Jack McCullough was declared innocent of the crime by the DeKalb County Circuit Court. On July 21, 2016, Jack's son-in-law filed a lawsuit against the Sycamore Police Department and Illinois State Police for refusal to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. This was brought forward following Schmack's allegations of police misconduct during a request to retry the case on November 3, 2015. Jack's civil rights lawyer, who said that Illinois was the epicenter for wrongful convictions, and called for reform of the justice system. In July 2020, Jack received a settlement of $300,000 from the city of Seattle after a lawsuit was filed against the police department and detectives that investigated and arrested him. The case of Maria Ridulph remains closed and unsolved to this day, despite an anonymous letter received naming another suspect. The investigators have never released the name of the new suspect. This could be due to the need to properly verify the evidence after the tumultuous investigation led to the arrest of an innocent man in what can only be described as a modern-day witch hunt. But we'd like to hear your take on the case presented today and what your thoughts are on the investigation procedure and the reliability of the evidence. On Tuesday, March 1st, 1932, Charles Lindbergh, a world-famous aviator, and his wife Anne Lindbergh, also an aviator, were having a usual night while their 20-month-old baby was resting upstairs in the nursery in their Hopewell home. The house staff had finished their work, and the child's nurse looked into the baby's nursery to check on him. Her jaw dropped when she couldn't find Charles Lindbergh Jr. in his crib. She ran downstairs in panic and alerted all the house members immediately. Charles Lindbergh Jr., the aviator couple's firstborn, had been abducted. Who could have committed such a terrible act? Was it a carefully executed inside job, or simply the work of a predator? Hopewell is a township in Mercer County, New Jersey, which dates back to the 1700s. It was founded in 1748 and incorporated in 1798. Its warm and humid summers and icy cold winters make it a huge attraction. Hopewell is considered one of the more secure places in the United States. With a population of just over 17,000, Hopewell is safer than 86% of American communities. The chance of a person falling victim to a crime here is 1 in 316. Even with such a low crime rate, Hopewell became the home ground of the crime of the century back in 1932. It became the town where Charles Lindbergh Jr. was abducted. Charles Augustus Lindbergh was born on February 4, 1902, in Detroit, Michigan, to Charles August Lindbergh and Evangeline Lodge Land Lindbergh. Lindbergh went to University of Wisconsin-Madison to pursue mechanical engineering. He dropped out in his sophomore year and moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to pursue flight training in Nebraska Aircraft Corporation's flying school. By the time he got out of there, he started working as a barnstormer to earn money and support himself. In the year 1923, Lindbergh bought himself his first plane for $500. Soon after that, Lindbergh began flying solo and performing aerial stunts as a barnstormer. But this wasn't enough for Lindbergh. He then enrolled himself in the year flight training program offered by the United States Air Army Services in San Antonio, Texas. He graduated top of his class and served as a U.S. Army service cadet in 1924. The next year, in 1925, he earned a commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Reserve Service Corps. Looking at Lindbergh's excellent performance in the Army, he was promoted to a captain by 1926. Lindbergh was already doing well and achieving his dreams, but he became a true aviation icon when he became the first man to fly non-stop solo across the Atlantic. The journey was a 33.5-hour-long flight, which started on May 20th, 1927, and ended the next day on May 21st, 1927. Lindbergh took off in New York and landed safely in Paris, covering a distance of 3,600 miles. Lindbergh gained immense fame after this achievement. The newspaper reported all his moves, and there were multiple articles written on him which spread the word of his excellence across the nation. Some termed him as the Flying Fool, while the others thought of him as a true hero. On December 21st, 1927, Lindbergh met Ann Spencer Morrow when her father invited him to Mexico City for a goodwill tour. Ann was born on June 22, 1906. She was the daughter of Dwight Morrow, who was a partner in J.P. Morgan and Company, and Elizabeth Cutter Morrow. She was raised in Englewood, New Jersey, and then later in New York. Ann first went to Dwight's School for Girls, and then graduated from the Chapin School in 1924. She too wanted to become an aviator and was excited to meet Lindbergh. Lindbergh trained Ann under his wing, and eventually they grew fond of each other. They ended up marrying on May 27, 1929, at the Morrow Estate in Englewood, New Jersey. On June 22, 1930, Ann and Charles Lindbergh welcomed their first child. It was a baby boy, and they named him Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr., also known as Baby Lindbergh. The media instantly covered this event, and soon the whole nation got to know about Baby Lindbergh too. The public welcomed and cared for the baby as their own, and even nicknamed him Baby Lindy. Lindbergh and Ann wanted to have a quiet life and raise Baby Lindbergh away from the public eye and all the media interference. And so, in 1932, they moved into a newly built large estate in an isolated area in Hopewell, New Jersey. By the year 1932, Baby Lindbergh grew up to be an adorable toddler with blonde curly hair and a set of blue eyes. He had a light complexion and a dimple on his chin. On the chilly night of March 1, 1932, Ann and Lindbergh and their family dog were spending the night as usual in their Hopewell estate home. Their butler, Septimus Banks, was in the house too. Bessie Mowat Gowe, commonly known as Betty Gow, was at the Hopewell estate home as well. She worked as the child's nurse in the Lindbergh family. Since this estate had been recently built, some parts of it were still under construction. Normally, Ann and Lindbergh used to spend only weekends here, while the rest of the week they stayed at Ann's Englewood home in New Jersey with her parents. But due to Baby Lindbergh's bad cold, the family had decided to stay a little longer until the baby had recovered, as Ann didn't want to travel with Baby Lindbergh in this condition. At around 10 p.m. on March 1, 1932, Betty asked Ann whether she had Baby Lindbergh with her. Ann was getting out of the bath and told Betty that she didn't have the baby with her. Betty finished her chores and went upstairs to check on Baby Lindbergh. As a routine set by his father, Baby Lindbergh was sent to his crib in the nursery by 8 p.m. every day, and nobody was allowed to enter the nursery until 10 p.m., even if the baby was crying. He did this to make Baby Lindbergh stronger, as he thought of him as a weak child. When Betty went up to the nursery, she didn't see Baby Lindbergh anywhere and panicked. She went downstairs in a rush and informed the other house members about the incident. Betty's first thought was that Lindbergh was pulling a prank on his wife and had hidden the baby somewhere in the house. Lindbergh was known for his notorious practical jokes and would often cross the line while pranking his friends and family. He'd hidden Baby Lindbergh in a closet a couple of months ago and told Ann that he'd been kidnapped. Ann and the other family members stayed in a disturbed state of mind until Lindbergh brought out the baby he'd hidden in the closet for hours. But this time, it was not a joke. Baby Lindbergh had really been abducted. Lindbergh wasted no second and called the New York State Police. The police arrived at the Lindbergh estate at around 10:30 p.m. and began searching the area. In the nursery, which was on the second floor, Lindbergh himself found a ransom letter from the kidnapper, which was addressed to Colonel Lindbergh. About 70 feet away from the house, a pair of recently constructed makeshift ladders was found along the service road. The ladder was in two parts, so it could be easily carried. The ladder also had left marks on the wall on the right side of the nursery's window. The police deducted that these marks were made either during the ascent or descent when the kidnapper climbed in or out of the nursery. One of the two sections of the ladder had a split where it joined the other. This indicated that the ladder must have been broken while the kidnapper was accessing it. From looking at the ladder, it was evident that its creator possessed carpentry and mechanical skills, since the ladder was designed to retract for efficient use. Inside the nursery, there were traces of mud on the floor. A set of footprints were found under the nursery window too, but they were impossible to measure. This led the police to the muddy area outside the estate, which had footprints heading in the opposite direction of the house. The police tried to search and gather the abductor's fingerprints, which he may have left behind in the nursery, but the whole room had been wiped clean. The nursery had no fingerprints at all, not even the ones which should have been there, such as the babies, Anne's, Lindbergh's, and Betty's. Soon the media arrived at the Lindbergh estate too, and covered all the details. The news spread like wildfire, and the incident was made public across the whole nation. The police began the investigation immediately, and the case was their topmost priority. Initially, the police were sure of the fact that the abduction was an inside job, and someone who knew the Lindbergh family was involved, since the kidnapper knew very well where the nursery was and at what time the child would be alone. They first questioned the people who were present in the house when the abduction took place, and then the people who knew of the Lindberghs' unexpectedly extended stay at their Hopewell estate. While Betty Gow, the child's nurse, and Septimus Banks, the butler, were highly cooperative during the questioning, Violet Sharp and Lindbergh's parents' maid acted arrogant and altered her story multiple times. Violet Sharp was a lively girl who often enjoyed the company of men. Upon interrogation, Violet stated that she was out at the movies with a man on the night of the abduction. When asked to name the movie she had watched and the man she was with, she couldn't remember it. She later said that another couple had been with them, but she couldn't remember their names either. She even went on to take back her original statement and said that she was at a local speakeasy on the night the baby Lindbergh was kidnapped. Violet's constantly changing statements and suspicious behavior made her a person of interest in the Lindbergh kidnapping case, and she was frequently brought in for questioning at the local police station. In the first ransom note found on the windowsill of the nursery, the kidnapper demanded a sum of $50,000 from Lindbergh in exchange for the baby's safe return to the family. The kidnapper also warned Lindbergh not to contact the police. When the experts took a closer look at the ransom note, they claimed that the writer of these letters was of German nationality who had spent some time in America, based on the handwriting. On the bottom right of the letter was a unique symbol. There were 2 interlocking circles with a large red dot in the middle and 3 holes punched through the symbol. On March 6, 1932, Lindbergh received the second ransom letter, postmarked Brooklyn, New York, March 4th. In this letter, the kidnapper had increased the ransom demand to $70,000, as Lindbergh had gotten the police involved. The governor then called a conference meeting in Trenton, New Jersey, asking all the prosecuting officials, police authorities, and government representatives to attend to discuss various theories and policies of procedure. On March 8, 1932, Colonel Henry Breckinridge, Lindbergh's attorney, received the third ransom note. It stated that any intermediary between Lindbergh and the kidnappers that the family selected would not be accepted. On the very same day, Dr. John F. Condon, a retired school principal from the Bronx in New York, placed a personal advertisement in the newspapers and offered to act as the intermediary between Lindbergh and the kidnappers. He further offered to pay an additional $1,000 ransom to the kidnappers if they agreed. The following day, Dr. Condon received the fourth letter in which the kidnapper agreed to Dr. Condon acting as an intermediary. Lindbergh accepted as well. Dr. Condon received a sum of $70,000 on March 10, 1932. Immediately, he started negotiations for payment through the newspaper columns. Dr. Condon made use of the code word JAFC while communicating with the kidnapper. On March 12, 1932, Dr. Condon received the fifth ransom letter delivered by a taxicab driver named Joseph Perroni, who himself acquired the letter from an unidentified stranger. The letter stated that another note would be found beneath a stone at a vacant stand 100 feet from an outlying subway station. Dr. Condon got there and found the sixth note. This note gave Dr. Condon a set of instructions which led him to Woodlawn Cemetery, near 233rd Street and Jerome Avenue, where he met an unidentified man who called himself John. They discussed the payment of the ransom money and the stranger agreed to bring along a piece of evidence confirming the child's identity. Dr. Condon was accompanied by a bodyguard at all times except for the duration when he met John. The man came to be known as Cemetery John. Dr. Condon received a baby's sleeping suit and the 7th ransom note on March 16, 1932. The sleeping suit was delivered to the Lindbergh family, who then identified it to be baby Lindbergh's. Betty Gow, baby Lindbergh's nurse, found the infant's thumb guard near the entrance to the estate on March 29, 1932. She recalled that the infant had worn it at the time of the kidnapping. The 10th ransom note was received by Dr. Condon on April 1, 1932, which ordered him to have the money ready by the following night. On April 2, 1932, the 11th ransom letter was delivered to Dr. Condon by an unidentified taxicab driver who received it from an unknown man. This letter directed Dr. Condon to the site of the 12th ransom letter, which he found under a stone in front of a greenhouse at 3225 East Tremont Avenue, Bronx, New York. On the same evening, Dr. Condon met Cemetery John after following the instructions in the last letter. Dr. Condon then handed him the same amount in exchange for a receipt and the 13th note, and claimed that he could be found on a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. On one of Dr. Condon's visits to meet Cemetery John, Lindbergh had accompanied him too, but stayed in the car where he heard the stranger's voice when he said, "Hey, Doc." The following day, the police and the FBI worked together to search the area around Martha's Vineyard inside and out, but found no signs of baby Lindbergh anywhere. The events that took place during this crime were truly shocking and left a lasting impact on the public. But the real shocker was yet to come. On May 12, 1932, a man named William Allen, a truck driver, accidentally found the body of baby Lindbergh, partially buried and badly decomposed, about 4.5 miles southeast of the Lindbergh home, 45 feet from the highway near Mount Rose, New Jersey, in Mercer County. The bottom right side of the skull had a hole punched into it, and the left side of the skull had a crack. The autopsy showed that the child had been dead for around 2 months, which indicated that the child probably died on the day of his abduction. The Lindbergh family identified the body, which was then cremated in Trenton, New Jersey on May 13, 1932. This was a huge setback for the authorities and the Lindbergh family, as the kidnapper had cheated all of them, and they couldn't save baby Lindbergh. On May 26, 1932, the New Jersey State Police offered a reward of $25,000 to anyone who had any information that would lead to the conviction of the kidnapper or kidnappers. What happened on June 10, 1932, knocked the authorities off their feet. Violet Sharp, maid to Anne Lindbergh's family, took her own life just a day before she was supposed to show up for further questioning. However, her movements on the night of March 1, 1932, had been carefully checked, and it was ascertained that she had no connection with the abduction. The FBI still didn't lose hope of finding the kidnapper. About $40,000 of the ransom money that was handed to the kidnapper was marked with gold certificates, which were less in circulation and steadily reducing. The New York City Bureau Office issued a letter on January 17, 1934, to all banks in New York City, asking them to keep an extremely close watch for the ransom bills marked with gold certificates. They issued a pamphlet informing about the same and distributed copies of it to each employee handling currency in banks, clearinghouses, grocery stores, insurance companies, gas stations, airports, department stores, post offices, and telegraph companies. The case had already puzzled the investigators for a very long time, and in autumn of 1934, about 2.5 years after the kidnapping of baby Lindbergh, copying the serial numbers of the ransom money dollar bills paid off. On September 15, 1934, a teller at the Bronx Corn Exchange Bank noticed a gold bill with a license plate number inscribed in the margin. He found it a little suspicious and contacted the police right away. The police traced the receipt, which led them to a gas station. The worker there who received the gold bill made a note of the license plate of the man who handed him the note. The gas station worker found this odd because these gold bills were less in circulation now, and he made a comment about that to the man. The man then gave a strange reply during the transaction, He said, "I only have about 100 left." Observing this new set of evidence, on September 18, 1934, the police traced the license plate back to a man named Bruno Hauptmann and started to surveil his residence. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was born on November 26, 1899, in Kamenz, a town near Dresden in the Kingdom of Saxony, which was a state of the German Empire. Hauptmann moved to New York City in November 1923. The 24-year-old Hauptmann was taken in by a member of the established German community and started to work as a carpenter. He married a German waitress, Anna Schofler, in 1925 and became a father 8 years later. On September 19, 1934, Hauptmann realized that he was being watched and attempted to escape. Speeding and running through red lights, he was captured after finding himself blocked by a truck. In Hauptmann's garage, the police discovered a gas can stuffed with dollar bills worth almost $15,000, with serial numbers matching the ransom money which was handed out to the kidnapper about a couple of years ago. The police also found Dr. Condon's phone number inscribed on a wall. The police searched Hauptmann's residence thoroughly, and in his attic found a wooden plank missing a part which was similar to the one used to construct the makeshift ladder used in the abduction of baby Lindbergh. The wooden plank obtained from a section of the ladder was termed Rail 16. It was kept side by side to the wooden board in Hauptmann's attic and compared. There were differences in the dimensions of both the planks, as the one used for constructing the ladder had been cut accordingly. Arthur Kohler, a Forest Service expert, deduced that Rail 16 was once a part of the wooden board which was found in Hauptmann's attic. This was enough evidence for the police to charge Hauptmann with baby Lindbergh's murder and put him under arrest.
We have in custody the man who received the ransom money. His name is Bernard Richard Hauptmann.
The public already believed that Hauptmann was the one who kidnapped and killed baby Lindbergh 2 years ago. But Hauptmann's trial was not going to be a short one. He denied all the allegations put on him and said he didn't have anything to do with the Lindbergh kidnapping. Bruno Hauptmann's trial began. With the strong evidence the police had gathered, it seemed like a clear-cut case, but Hauptmann argued that he had an alibi to prove his innocence. Hauptmann claimed that Isidor Fisch, a fellow German friend of his, had given him a few crates that belonged to Fisch. Hauptmann said that he was holding on to Fisch's belongings while he went to Germany for a visit. In these crates that belonged to Fisch, Hauptmann found the ransom money. Hauptmann also went on to say that his friend Fisch had passed away due to tuberculosis soon after reaching Germany. This claim cast a doubt on a critical element of the prosecution's case. To counter Hauptmann's statement, the prosecution proceeded with a dozen witnesses, including Dr. Condon and Lindbergh himself. Dr. Condon went ahead and testified that Hauptmann was Cemetery John, the man he handed the ransom money to. When Hauptmann was made to stand in a lineup along with some other criminals, Dr. Condon stated it was too difficult for him to identify the man because when he met him earlier only for a few minutes, it was dark and he was standing about 5 feet away from Cemetery John. But he was quick to change his words and was suddenly sure that Bruno Hauptmann was Cemetery John. Lindbergh, too, accompanied Dr. Condon to one of his meetings with Cemetery John, although he stayed in the car. Lindbergh only heard Cemetery John's voice when he called out, "Hey Doc," from a distance. But Lindbergh, too, testified that it was Hauptmann's voice he'd heard that night. The prosecution then proceeded to present the similarities between Hauptmann's handwriting and the handwriting in the ransom letters. The handwriting experts noted that all the letters had a distinct start and stop quality. All the ransom letters were written in a way to disguise the true handwriting. But even with the attempt at disguising the letters, there were some strong similarities that persisted throughout all the ransom letters. The experts also noticed a few stylistic features in the notes. The word police appeared 13 times in the letters and showed a consistency in the unusual way the capital P was written. The word boy was also distinctive, particularly in the way the O was left open in the middle, which made it look like a U. This was consistent in all the ransom letters. But the one style that struck the experts the most was how the letter N was written. In the ransom letters, it appeared as if the letter N was written almost completely backwards. The capital D was also highly stylized. Consistencies like these and the attempt to disguise the letters led the experts to the conclusion that all the letters were written by the same person, and that person was most probably a native German speaker.
After examining the genuine handwriting of Hauptmann and the writing in the letters, there is no doubt, I believe, but this is the writer of the letters.
The next challenge that the prosecution faced was to prove that these letters were written by Bruno Hauptmann. The police started to compare Hauptmann's journal and the ransom letters side by side and noticed that the word boat was misspelt as bode in the ransom letter as well as in Hauptmann's journal. Other similarities between the journal and the letters, such as the open O, the laterally inverted N, and the highly stylized D, made all fingers point at Hauptmann. Even though all the evidence and proof supported the fact that Hauptmann was involved in baby Lindbergh's abduction, Hauptmann maintained his innocence. Hauptmann's wife, Anna Schofler, even went public with her statements to fight for her husband's innocence. She claimed that she'd known Hauptmann for a very long time, and he could never have kidnapped a child, let alone hurt him. The suspicion that someone from the inside too was involved in baby Lindbergh's kidnapping was thrown out by the police when they couldn't find a potential suspect. Even though there was never any credible evidence that linked Hauptmann to the Lindbergh family, Hauptmann was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and extortion in 1936. The authorities offered to spare Hauptmann's death sentence if he named his accomplices. He never did, and always claimed to be innocent. The jury found him guilty, and on April 3, 1936, Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison. Hauptmann's widowed wife had two pastors conduct a private memorial service in German for him and had his body cremated. Bruno Richard Hauptmann went to his grave still maintaining his innocence. Decades after Hauptmann was charged and executed for the abduction and murder of baby Lindbergh, a few theories started to surface during the 80s and 90s. This gave a new twist to the tale. Researchers and theorists looked at the case once again with a new angle, which painted a completely different picture. This theory placed Lindbergh himself as the prime suspect in baby Lindbergh's kidnapping. Back when the abduction took place, the police and Lindbergh's admirers were blinded by Lindbergh's heroic persona to ever even think of him as a suspect. The researchers took a close look at Lindbergh's life and personality and noted that the police overlooked a lot of red flags when investigating the kidnapping case. On the night the kidnapping took place, Lindbergh was supposed to be in New York for a speaking appointment, but he missed it. He claimed that he forgot about the event and couldn't inform anyone about it. This was very unlike Lindbergh, as he was usually very organized and punctual. During the investigation, when the FBI stepped in to take up the case, Lindbergh wasn't completely in support of their offer and made sure that he was fully in charge of the investigation. Later, when the police suspected that the kidnapping could have been an inside job, Lindbergh immediately dismissed the theory without giving it a second thought. Lindbergh even made use of unorthodox methods that went against the police protocol to find his son. He engaged a local mobster named Mickey Roaster by giving him a copy of the first ransom letter found in baby Lindbergh's nursery. Hearing about the case, the infamous gangster Al Capone, who was serving time in a federal prison, offered to help in exchange for a reduced sentence. Al Capone's offer was politely declined. Lindbergh was also a firm and enthusiastic believer of eugenics, a discipline that was popular in those days. Eugenics was a theoretical use of biology and breeding to produce a superior human race. It stated that only the fittest specimens of humanity should be allowed to reproduce. Lindbergh believed himself to be a possessor of such genes and was an early supporter of Hitler's eugenics program. It was also proved that Lindbergh maintained 3 other families, 2 in Germany and 1 in Switzerland. By 3 women, he'd fathered 7 children from whom he had hid his identity for safety. Medical records showed that Lindbergh's 20-month-old son, baby Lindbergh, had a moderate case of rickets. Some of his toes overlapped, and he even needed aid standing up. His fontanelle, the open area of the newborn skull that's flexible and closes in the child's first months was still open. Baby Lindbergh was given large doses of vitamin D and made to nap under a sun lamp daily. Moreover, Elizabeth Morrow, Anne Lindbergh's sister, suffered from mental illnesses for most of her life. This fact was known to Lindbergh, and it acted as another strike against his weak son's genetics. This theory concluded that Lindbergh misused his power to cover up his own actions and made Hauptmann the scapegoat by altering the findings in the investigation led by him. Lindbergh believed his child was physically inferior and wanted him to be removed, especially when Anne was in the early stages of her second pregnancy. This seemed like an opportunity for Lindbergh to raise a more appropriate and physically superior child. This theory also suspected Lindbergh and Violet of being accomplices in the child's kidnapping. While Lindbergh decided to stay back home that night to make sure nobody entered the nursery while Violet took the baby with her, it still wasn't certain whether Lindbergh intended his child's death or not. Another theory that looped Violet Sharp in suggested that she could have been Hauptmann's accomplice and lover. Since the kidnapper knew exactly where the nursery was, it was suspected that the kidnapper had help from someone who knew the family and the Hopewell estate. Violet was certainly one of the very few people who knew that the child would be at Hopewell that night. She also knew the layout of the house and the location of the nursery. Violet had a poor reputation because of her affairs with multiple men, and it was suspected that she had a relationship with Hauptmann, who, despite being married, wouldn't decline an opportunity to mingle with other women. Kidnapping the Lindbergh baby seemed fitting for her, as the ransom money would be her only way out of the servant life and a hope to start a new life elsewhere. In this case, the theorists believed that the child's death could have been an accident. The twist in this case was so unexpected and surreal that it left everyone speechless. It was one of those rare cases that made you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. was an adorable little kid whose life was cut short by a predator. His sudden departure left his family in trauma, which haunted them till the end of their lives. The recent findings and development in baby Lindbergh's case have reignited a spark and raised many questions that were ignored and overlooked back when Hauptmann was convicted. Even though it's still in question whether Hauptmann really abducted and killed baby Lindbergh, the experts in the crime branch and a bunch of detectives are still working to put an end to this case and figure out what happened to baby Lindbergh on the night of March 1st, 1932. Although if it wasn't Hauptmann, it's too late to convict the real culprit now, but still not too late to clear an innocent man's name. The baby Lindbergh case was full of twists and turns that kept everyone on the edge of their seats, and it still continues to captivate the public and challenge investigators to this day.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child just got badly.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
On June 7th, 2021, about 65 miles from Charleston, 52-year-old Alex Murdaugh was panicking in his Islandton estate. He made a frantic call to 911 in the middle of the night. What was the reason behind this emergency call? As the emergency services picked up the call, Alex explained that his wife and son had been brutally murdered inside his property.
I'm still here. Stay on the line. I'm still here, okay? Carlton, I have an Alex Murdaugh on the line, caller from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot. Mr. Murdaugh, go ahead and talk to Carlton.
It's 4147 Moselle Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay.
Conner County Communications.
Carlton, I have an Alex Murdaugh on the line, caller from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot.
Okay, and sir, give me the address again.
It's 4147 Moselle Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay.
The 911 operator then asked about Alex's situation and where he was located.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am. They're on the ground out at my kennel.
Who could have murdered a wife and a son? And what was Alex Murdaugh's connection to the murders? The Murdaugh family was a well-known legal dynasty in South Carolina with a history spanning over a century. The family's involvement in the legal profession began with Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who was admitted to the South Carolina bar in 1910. He went on to become a prominent lawyer, serving as a solicitor for the 14th Judicial Circuit in South Carolina for 20 years. He formed a law firm, Murdaugh & Murdaugh, in 1910. Randolph Murdaugh Sr.'s sons, Randolph Jr. and John, followed in their father's footsteps and became lawyers as well. The family's involvement in the legal profession continued with the younger generation. Several members of the family, including Alex Murdaugh, had become lawyers and worked for the family's law firm. In addition to their public service, members of the Murdaugh family had been involved in numerous high-profile cases, including landmark civil rights cases. Despite the recent controversies and legal troubles involving some members of the Murdaugh family, their long-standing history of public service and contributions to the legal profession cannot be ignored. Alex Murdaugh was born to Randolph Murdaugh III and Elizabeth Libby Murdaugh on May 27, 1968, in Hampton County, South Carolina. Alex attended the University of South Carolina and graduated with a degree in political science in 1990. He went on to attend the University of South Carolina School of Law, where he received his law degree in 1994. After graduating from law school, Alex joined his family's law firm, which had been in operation for over 70 years at that time. Alex met Maggie Brandstetter while they were both attending the University of South Carolina. They got married on August 14, 1993, and their wedding was reportedly a large and lavish affair. The couple had 2 children together. After their marriage, Alex and Maggie settled in Hampton County, South Carolina, where they raised their 2 children. Paul Murdaugh was the younger son of Alex and Maggie. He was born on April 14, 1999, and grew up in Hampton County, South Carolina, where he attended high school at Hampton High School. After graduating from high school, Paul went on to attend the University of South Carolina, where he studied political science. Buster Murdaugh, Paul's elder brother, was born in 1996 and also attended Hampton High School. Following the tragic deaths of his brother and mother in June 2021, Buster had largely stayed out of the public eye. It was on June 7, 2021. As the night settled over Alex Murdaugh's sprawling estate in Islandtown, South Carolina, he anxiously waited for his wife Maggie. She had a habit of playing with their beloved dogs in the kennel before retiring for the evening, and he couldn't wait to be reunited with her after his trip. Meanwhile, outside, their son Paul was hard at work replanting the garden after the recent strong winds had uprooted many of their cherished plants. But little did any of them know that this routine evening would soon turn into a nightmare. Alex's father was at the hospital, and his mother was a late-stage Alzheimer's patient. He decided to go check on his mom before settling in for the night. Meanwhile, he also texted Maggie, but there was no response. Anyhow, Alex came back from his mom's house and still found that both Paul and Maggie were not in the house. He knew they might be fooling around as usual, but as he made his way toward them, he stumbled upon something that would shatter his family's world forever. With a heart full of dread, Alex realized that his wife and son had been brutally murdered outside their home. The once idyllic estate was now a scene of unimaginable tragedy, and Alex's life would never be the same again. As Alec Murdaugh dialed 911 to report the heinous crime that had taken place on his property, his voice shook with a mixture of fear and horror. When Officer David Owen arrived on the scene, Alex struggled to contain his emotions as he recounted the gruesome details of what he'd witnessed.
It's bad. It's bad. Check the pulses.
Yes, sir.
This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I went and got... This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
You know, he's been getting, like, punched. I know that's what it is.
Through choked sobs, Alex described the chilling scene that had unfolded before his eyes. He spoke of the blood-soaked ground and the scattered remains of his son, Paul, whose brain and organs were now exposed to the night air.
From back there?
I went to the house, and they weren't home, which was odd. I tried to call.
Okay.
And then I knew they had been down here before I left to go to my mom's.
Okay.
And so that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it. But I mean...
He frantically searched for any signs of life, his hands trembling as he checked his wife and son for pulses.
And I ran over to Maggie, and actually, I think I tried to turn Paul over first.
But the chilling reality soon dawned on him. There was no hope for their survival.
For just a little while, tried to call her when I left, texted her, no response.
Did you touch Maggie at all?
I did. I touched them both.
Okay.
I tried to take, I tried to do it as limited as possible, but I tried to take their pulse on both of them.
What family members did you call?
I called my brother Randy, and I called my brother John. And I tried to call a little boy, real good friend that's right around the corner from here, but I didn't get him.
The police officer then asked Alex why he was outside his home so late. Alex revealed important information about his family. He told the officer that both his dad and mum are sick, and he needs to take care of them from time to time.
What made you come out here tonight?
I went to, my mom's a late stage Alzheimer's patient. My dad's in the hospital. My mom gets anxious when she does. I went to check on them and Maggie. Maggie's a dog lover, and she fools with the dogs. And I knew she'd gone to the kennel. I was at the house. I left the house and went to my mom's for just a little while. Tried to call her when I left, texted her, no response. When I got back to the house was obviously nobody was in there, so I figured they're still up here fooling around.
He also said that his son Paul was out attending to the plants that had died.
Paul was gonna be getting set up to plant. Our sunflower seeds got sprayed and died, and he was refiguring to plant the sunflower seeds.
The police officer also asked Alex if he'd been having any problems with trespassers or neighbors around the area, but Alex denied it. He said he only knew one problem that his son, Paul, had been involved in, and that was the boat wreck incident.
Have y'all been having any problems out here? Trespassers, people breaking in?
None that I know of. The only thing what comes to my mind is my son Paul was in a boat wreck a couple years ago.
Had Maggie and Paul been arguing over anything?
No.
What was their relationship like?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. How about yours and Maggie's?
Wonderful. I mean, I'm sure we had little things here and there, but we had a wonderful marriage, wonderful relationship.
And yours and Paul's relationship?
As good as it could be.
How old was Paul?
22.
Okay. You know his date of birth?
I do. April 11th, 96 is his brother's. April 14th, 99 is Paul's.
How about, what's Maggie's full name?
Margaret Brandstetter Murdaugh.
And her date of birth, sir?
September 15th, 1968.
Have y'all been having any problems out here? Trespassers, people breaking in?
None that I know of. The only thing what comes to my mind is my son Paul was in a boat wreck a couple years ago, and there's been he was charged with being arrested for being the driver. There's been a lot of negative publicity about that, and there's been a lot of people online, just really vile stuff. But when Paul's out and about, I mean, people routinely, I don't think I know the full story, because I don't think they give it to me, but I mean, he's been punched and hit and just attacked a lot. So, but I mean, nothing like this.
Yeah. The boating accident that Paul Murdaugh was involved in occurred on February 24th, 2019, in Beaufort County, South Carolina. The idyllic waters of Archer's Creek in South Carolina were shattered by a tragedy that would haunt the Murdaugh family for years to come. Paul, the son of the family, was at the helm of a boat carrying 6 passengers, including 19-year-old Mallory Beach, when it crashed into a bridge piling.
What bridge is it? Paul, what bridge is this? Paul, what bridge?
911, where's your emergency? Hello? Police, fire, EMS. Hello?
We're in a boat crash on Archer Street.
Whereabouts on Archer Street?
In Archer Street, the only bridge on Archer Street.
The impact was devastating, and Mallory was thrown from the boat, her body lost in the murky waters. It would be a week before her lifeless body was found, her young life snuffed out by the horrific accident. The other passengers on the boat were injured, their bodies and spirits battered by the trauma of the crash.
There's a 6-foot gash where the boat actually came apart at the seam from the nose toward the back, 6 foot long.
Paul was charged with 3 felonies in connection with the accident, but Mallory's tragic death would leave the case unresolved, leaving a cloud of sorrow and suspicion hanging over the entire community. The Murdaugh family's prominent status in the area only added to the tragedy, as whispers of a possible cover-up by law enforcement swirled around the investigation.
And this tragedy may have been the start of their fall.
For the families of the victims, the pain of loss would never fully heal, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating toll of one fateful night on Archer's Creek. As the investigation into the Murdaugh family's tragedy deepened, the authorities stumbled upon a disturbing piece of evidence. The police discovered bullet shells littering the grounds of the Murdaugh family's home on the night of June 7, 2021. The implications were chilling, raising more questions than answers. Was this the work of a ruthless intruder, or had the violence originated from within the walls of the Murdaugh estate? The weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air as the search for answers continued.
By your feet. I need to collect them. I saw one over here. There's 2 right there.
Yes, he actually spent Tracy.
We'll get a dynamic. All right, go ahead and pick that one up. There's 2 right there.
Yep.
They've been there a little while. Should be 300s. There's 1 to your right.
Yeah, 300, yep.
Yeah. And it was...
The possibility that the shell casings might be connected to the murders was a chilling prospect, leaving those affected by the tragedy to grapple with the possibility of even more senseless violence.
Right here. Could have been wrong. I was just trying to discreetly here to go. The orientation. separately. Don't rub them together too much. Keep from scarring them.
Following the discovery of bullet shells at the Murdaugh family's home in the wake of the brutal murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, law enforcement officials sprung into action. They combed through the property, leaving no stone unturned. Meanwhile, family members and associates were put through rigorous interviews as the authorities searched for answers. The investigation was shrouded in secrecy, with the full extent of the police's findings kept under wraps. However, a bombshell revelation had emerged: the possibility that the murders were linked to the boating accident that had taken Mallory's life. As the investigation raced forward, potential motives for the heinous act began to emerge. Was the Beach family involved in the murder? Did they do this to take revenge? Or was this something else? But wait, there was something else. Another great revelation was about to be revealed. As the investigation into the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh intensified, a shocking development came to light. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division had reopened an investigation into a 2015 hit-and-run case involving the death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith. In 2015, Stephen Smith was killed in a hit-and-run accident in Hampton County, South Carolina. Despite extensive investigation, no one was ever charged in connection with his death. Fast forward to 2021, after the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, the case gained renewed attention as authorities began investigating whether the murders and Smith's death were somehow connected. Enter Alex, a prominent South Carolina lawyer who was connected to the hit-and-run death of Stephen Smith through his work as a lawyer for the family of the driver who was suspected of hitting Smith. Murdaugh represented the driver's family in a wrongful death lawsuit that was filed by Smith's family. In 2017, the lawsuit was settled for $500,000, with the driver admitting no fault in Smith's death. Following the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, questions were raised about whether the Murdaugh family's connections to the hit-and-run case may have played a role in the murders. Now, the authorities had two potential leads who could be involved in the murder of Alex's wife and son. First was the Beach family, who had been wronged by the Murdaughs, and the second was the Smith family, who had been cheated by the Murdaughs. But again, the investigation team had no solid proof against either of these families. During the investigation into the Murdaugh family murders, another stunning development emerged. On September 2, 2021, an employee at Alex Murdaugh's law firm stumbled upon a curious check made out to Alex Murdaugh, not the law firm, for a whopping $3 million. The check was from an account belonging to the law firm, but had been deposited into Alex Murdaugh's account. As the news broke, the law firm confronted Alex Murdaugh, and a probe by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division began. The identity of the employee who uncovered the check was kept confidential, and the investigation focused on whether the missing funds were related to the Murdaugh family murders or other illegal activities. In their search for answers, law enforcement agents executed search warrants at the law firm and other Murdaugh family properties, interviewed family members, associates, and friends, and performed forensic examinations of electronic devices and other evidence. This information, and the information about the Smiths hit-and-run case, revealed a lot about Alex's character. The sobbing father and husband, who was once panicking while calling 911, was now a cheat and a fraud. A bombshell dropped on September 6, 2021, when reports revealed that Alex had been forced to resign from his prestigious law firm following a $3 million fraud discovery. The check had been deposited into his personal account, raising suspicions among the firm's management. An investigation by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division was launched into the missing funds, with media reports hinting at a massive embezzlement scheme that may have been going on for years. In the aftermath of the scandal, the firm's statement announced Murdaugh's resignation as necessary for the benefit of our firms and clients. On September 4, 2021, the unimaginable happened to Alex Murdaugh. He was shot while inspecting a flat tire on the side of a deserted rural road in South Carolina. The bullet hit close to his head.
Okay, what's going on?
I got a flat tire, and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me. And when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
Oh, okay. Were you shot?
Yes, but I mean, I'm okay.
You shot where? Where were you shot at?
Huh?
Did they actually shoot you or they tried to shoot you?
They shot me, but...
Okay, wait, you need EMS?
Well, I mean, yes, I can't drive.
Okay.
I'm trouble seeing, and I'm bleeding a lot.
Where part of your body?
I'm not sure. Somewhere on my head.
Your head?
Somewhere on my head. Somebody just stopped for me, ma'am.
He claimed that he'd pulled over to check on his car's tire when a passing vehicle opened fire on him. At first, the incident seemed like a random shooting, but things soon began to unravel. Investigators questioned the timelines of events and the severity of Murdaugh's injuries. Was he really shot, or was this just an elaborate ruse? As the investigation unfolded, the police began to suspect that Murdaugh himself may have staged the shooting to deflect attention away from himself as a possible suspect in the murders. The case became a race against time as investigators dug deeper into the web of lies and secrets surrounding the Murdaugh family. With every twist and turn, the stakes grew higher and the truth more elusive. Would they be able to solve the case before it was too late? After the shooting incident on September 4th, 2021, Alex Murdaugh shocked the world with a statement through his lawyers. In the statement, he confessed to a lot of decisions that he truly regrets and said that he was entering rehab and stepping away from his responsibilities. But what were these decisions? Was he struggling with substance abuse or mental health issues? The media and public couldn't stop speculating. The statement was released amidst an ongoing investigation into the murders of his wife and son, as well as allegations of misappropriated funds from his law firm. Murdaugh's lawyers asked for privacy and said that their client was committed to making amends. But with the intense scrutiny surrounding Murdaugh and his family, it was clear that the truth was about to be uncovered. What would happen next? The world held its breath as the shocking events continued to unfold. In a stunning turn of events, on September 14, 2021, Alex Murdaugh shockingly pleaded guilty to charges related to the shooting incident and made a jaw-dropping admission that left the public reeling. He admitted to masterminding a plan with Curtis Edward Smith to stage his own shooting in order to collect a staggering $10 million life insurance payout for his son, Richard.
Okay, so Mr. Murdaugh had somebody shoot him in the head on the roadside to have a $10 or $12 million insurance policy paid to his son Buster.
Prosecutors revealed that Murdaugh had provided Smith with a gun and detailed instructions on how to carry out the hit.
I was there and I saw Alec, he'd been shot. I was there and I tried to stop Alec. Yes, I shot him in the head.
This bombshell revelation added yet another layer of intrigue to an already convoluted and high-profile case, which had already been marked by murder, accusations of financial misconduct, and intense scrutiny of the Murdaugh family's prominent position in South Carolina's legal and political circles. On September 16, Alex Murdaugh, scion of the Murdaugh dynasty, was found guilty of planning a suicide scheme. According to his lawyers, he was struggling with mental health issues and had turned to painkillers and other drugs to cope. In the depths of South Carolina's rural countryside, a 57-year-old woman named Gloria Satterfield met a mysterious end. In February 2018, tragedy struck as Gloria Satterfield, a devoted nanny and housekeeper of more than 2 decades, suffered a fall at the Murdaugh family home. Despite fighting for her life for several weeks, she eventually succumbed to her injuries. But things took a suspicious turn after the funeral. Enter Mr. Murdaugh, who introduced Gloria's 2 adult sons to his buddy, Corey Fleming, promising to help them get to the bottom of their mother's death. However, the sons soon discovered they were in the dark about the relationship between Mr. Fleming and their wealthy employer. And to add insult to injury, they had yet to receive any of the $2.8 million settlement that was supposed to be paid out, with a total agreement of $4.3 million after lawyers' fees. However, amid this tragic turn of events, Ms. Satterfield's family made a bold accusation. They alleged that the Murdaugh family was responsible for Gloria's death, hoping to collect settlement funds related to her passing. The revelation sent shockwaves through the small South Carolina community as the Murdaugh's connections to the local legal and political establishment were scrutinized once more. As the investigation into Gloria Satterfield's depth deepened, it became clear that the story of the Murdaugh family was far from over, and the tragedy of those caught up in their web continued to unfold. Fast forward to October 2021, and the long arm of the law finally caught up with Mr. Murdaugh. Police arrested him on 2 counts of obtaining property by false pretenses, a serious felony offense carrying a hefty maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. And where did they nab him? At a detox center in sunny Orlando, Florida. This was another blow to Alex Murdaugh. In between the investigation of Alex's beloved wife and son, Alex's life was falling apart. The investigation team had finally caught up with the lies and frauds of Alex Murdaugh, uncovering a web of deceit that spanned years. But as they delved deeper into his sordid past, they began to wonder, could the murders of his wife and son have been a calculated move to throw the authorities off his scent? Rumors began to swirl that someone may have targeted Alex's family for the hefty insurance payout, leaving him as the sole beneficiary. But with Alex's mounting debts and a long history of shady dealings, suspicions soon turned toward him as the mastermind behind the heinous crime. As the police began to re-examine Alex's old testimonies from the day of the murders, they picked up on a series of inconsistencies that only added to the mounting evidence against him. With each new clue, the web of lies and deceit grew thicker, leaving investigators on the edge of their seats as they closed in on the truth. The investigation team had been poring over the evidence in the Murdaugh case for months, searching for any clue that could crack the case wide open. And then they found it, a major breakthrough that would send shockwaves through the community. It all started with a video, one that captured a seemingly innocuous moment between Alex and his son Paul. Just hours before Paul's untimely death. In the footage, Alex could be seen wearing a pale blue shirt as he helped Paul plant trees on the family estate. But when Alex called the police after the murders, he was wearing a completely different shirt, a crisp white one. The discovery sent chills down the spines of the investigators as they realized the gravity of what this could mean. Why would Alex change his shirt in the midst of such a horrific tragedy? And more importantly, what else had he been hiding from them all this time? As the pressure mounted, Alex had no answer to these questions, leaving the investigators to draw their own conclusions. With this newfound evidence, they could finally confirm that Alex was present at the scene of the crime on the night of the murders, despite his repeated denials over the past 20 months. The revelation had the potential to blow the case wide open and bring the killer to justice. On the night of the murders, when the police interviewed Alex, he clearly said that he did not have any issues with his wife and that his marriage was going smoothly.
Had Maggie and Paul been arguing over anything?
No.
What was their relationship like?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. How about yours and Maggie's?
Wonderful. I mean, I'm sure we had little things here and there, but we had a wonderful marriage, wonderful relationship.
But a day after the murders, the estate's housekeeper found Maggie's, Alex's wife's, ring under the seat of her car. The housekeeper then revealed to the police that Maggie did not wear her wedding ring on the night of the murders. Why was this? People usually don't wear their wedding rings when their marriage isn't going well. Again, Alex had no answer to this question either. This was a win for the police. Apparently, a local newspaper in Richard County, where Alex was jailed, published taped phone calls between Alex and his son Buster. Buster was overheard telling his father that he'd done some illegal shit, to which his father Alex jokingly responded by saying that he had allegedly done illegal shit.
Well, I think it does matter, man. I don't think it's, I mean something's got to give. I mean, I understand that you've done illegal shit, but that doesn't mean you can just, turn a cold shoulder to the laws of the United States. I've allegedly done illegal stuff.
He was making fun of the trial and the whole legal process. This confirmed that Alex had actually done something more than fraud, because he was already in jail for the crimes he'd committed. Now the police got evidence that Alex was a liar. First, he lied about not being at the crime scene, but the police found the pale blue shirt video. Then he also lied about committing fraud at his firm in the sense that he knew he was committing a crime when he stole from his firm. This was enough to build a strong case against Alex. On the day of the murders, Alex was about to be exposed for stealing from his firm. According to the firm, he was supposed to deposit $800,000 in lawyer fees in the bank account of the firm, but he failed to do so.
So that's the firm actually, as we found these, put money in client trust. We then met with all the clients, reestablished what the correct disbursements should have been, and returned all funds to the clients.
So the firm had to pay the money back that you've determined in each one of these cases that Alec Murdaugh misappropriated through the fake forge on this list.
We did.
The police thought this could be a reason why the murders occurred on that specific day. Alex could have distracted the police with the murders, and the stolen money case could have stayed hidden. The twists and turns of the Alec Murdaugh case had left everyone on the edge of their seats. From the sudden death of his wife and son, to the revelation of his massive debt and shady financial dealings, the story had all the makings of a true crime thriller. But just when everyone thought they had it all figured out, the case took an insane turn. In a shocking admission in May 2022, Alex revealed that he owed Ms. Satterfield's sons a staggering $4.3 million plus lawyers' fees, while the police launched an investigation into her death, which had been registered as natural on her death certificate, despite suspicions to the contrary. Then, in December 2022, Alex was indicted on 9 counts of tax evasion, with prosecutors alleging that he had defrauded people of a mind-boggling $8.8 million. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any crazier, the homicide trials began in January 2023, with Alex standing accused of murdering his own wife and son. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and with his criminal history ranging from Stephen Smith to Ms. Gloria Satterfield, it seemed like the case was all but sealed. But the most seasoned true crime enthusiasts were left stunned when, on March 2, 2023, the jury delivered their verdict. Alex Murdaugh was indeed the murderer of his own wife and son. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and left everyone wondering what other secrets this twisted case might still be hiding. At the start of this case, nobody could have ever guessed that the crying and panicking face of Alex Murdaugh, who had called 911 immediately after the murder of his wife and son, could actually kill someone. The forensic analysis of the gunshot residue found on Alex's clothes matched with the gunshot residue on the entry and exit wounds over the bodies of Paul and Maggie. This rightly proved that the gun which killed Paul and Maggie was held by Alex himself.
If a recently fired firearm was wrapped up inside that jacket, would that be consistent with your findings?
There is a possibility of that, yes.
After this evidence and all the others, Alex was sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole. He was sent to Kirkland Detention Center, where he'd live for 45 days until the authorities determined which maximum security prison would be suitable for Alex. With Alex in jail for this brutal crime, it leaves us with many questions. Why was Alex involved in so many financial scams, even after being born into a super rich family? Did Alex kill his wife and son just to distract the authorities and gain sympathy so that he could hide his fraud schemes and the illegal scams he'd done? Or were these murders done to gain more insurance money from the insurers? If you enjoyed the video, do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more intriguing true crime content. Until next time, stay safe.